Hello, and welcome to Trails of Cold Steel 4, Part 0. Now, this video is basically gonna be for anyone who's never played the previous ones. I'm gonna go through the backstory here, which is basically about, you know, Trails of Cold Steel 1, 2, and 3, and there's obviously spoilers for the whole story for all three of them. And they're basically slideshows, kind of, and there's text and pictures. So I'll be reading through all of them. I won't have the camera up for it because it's a very long video. I mean, it's gonna be at least about 2 hours or so. But if you've never played, you stay there. If you've never played the Trails games and you want to watch the playthrough, this is basically for you. I was tempted to just go right into new game, but I figured, you know, some people just don't have time to see the old ones, and maybe they want to see this one. So, might as well give people a chance. I plan to do probably multiple videos a day for this. Sometimes. I'm going to be uploading 1 to 2 videos a day for just this game alone on top of my other playthroughs. Because I have actually played the first act of this before, and I'd like to get caught up and get to the new stuff that I haven't done. Because I started this game on PlayStation, and I'm on PC now. I started on PlayStation, and I got through Act 1, and I ended up not finishing it. And no real reason why. I wanted to start a channel, and I got sidetracked with other stuff. Then I realized this was coming out on PC, and I'm like, okay, I'll just wait and then do this on the channel. So it's going to be a little weird. Excuse me. It's going to be a little weird playing not blind to an entire act. If you're here for like blind reactions and stuff and you've already played the game, you're not going to see him in Act 1. I mean, I know what's going to happen up to that point. But after that, I have not been spoiled whatsoever. I don't know anything about Act 2, or if there even is more than Act 2. I'm sure there's more than just 2 acts. From what I heard from friends who've played it, I'm about a third. I made it a third away through the game before I was blind. This is a very long game, so it's going to be quite a few episodes. And these backstories, even if you haven't played the other Trails games, they're all about 100 hours long, roughly. Like, just if you just do the story and do the fights and stuff, they could be shorter if you play on easy or something and your battles are 5 seconds long. But yeah, basically this backstory is going to cover 300 hours of game into a small 2-hour video or whatever I'm doing. So, if you haven't played, this is not really a replacement for that. Like, it's still not going to cover everything, but it should cover a decent amount. So, yeah, that's about it. We should just jump into this, I think. All right, let's jump in. Trails of Cold Steel 1, Prologue. We're going to be going through a lot, so I'm pretty much just going to read it out as quickly as I can, so we can, you know, have a good idea. The year was 1204 of the Septian calendar, and all across Erebonia, spring was in bloom. At the esteemed Thor's Military Academy, situated on the outskirts of the Imperial capital, a new class was founded. It would be known as Class 7, and was composed of 9 promising young men and women who demonstrated considerable aptitude for the Arcus, a sophisticated and new type of battle orbment. Rien Schwarzer, son of a ruling lord from the remote region of Amir. Elisa Reinford, daughter of the chairman of Erebonia's largest industrial corporation. Elliot Craig, son of a celebrated general and a kind-hearted boy who harbored dreams of becoming a musician. Laura S. Arcade, the daughter of a renowned military family tracing its lineage back to the knights of old. Machias Regnitz, the son of Heimdall's imperial governor. Emma Milstein, the class's president and the academy's highest scorer on the entrance exam. Eustace Elberea, son of Duke Elberea, head of one of the Empire's 4 great houses. Fie Clausel, a former Jaeger with extraordinary strength and agility. And Gaius Warzel, an exchange student from the land of Nord, bordering the Empire to the north. Gathered together by their homeroom teacher, Sarah Valestein, they were put through a difficult trial. Some were quick to work together, others less so, but eventually all were able to surmount the challenge they faced. They were then asked to decide whether, knowing the difficulty of the curriculum, they still wished to be part of Class 7. Each had his or her own reasons, but each ultimately heeded the call, and that day, Thor's newest class began. Chapter 1. April came, and while the students of Class 7 were already grappling with their challenging coursework, they received a sudden announcement that they were to take part in an unusual program, a series of field studies. The class would be split into 2 groups, each sent to a different location in the Empire, to assist the local townships. Group A went to the rural town of Seldik, famous for its grand market. Through their tasks, they gained a greater understanding of one another, and all appeared to be going well on the surface. But that came to a sudden halt when they discovered that 2 market stalls had been vandalized during the still of night. Determined to find the culprit, Group A made their way to the Lunaria Nature Park. They found and apprehended the group of bandits responsible, but were immediately surrounded by the provincial army, who turned out to be in league with the bandits all along. Just as the situation grew more dire by the second, the railway military police, led by the notoriously brilliant Captain Clare, swiftly arrived at the scene. It was thanks to their timely intervention that the provincial army was forced to retreat, and the bandits were duly arrested for their crimes. The very first field study now at an end, Group A boarded the train back to Trista, and reflected on the events that transpired over the course of their stay. It was then that Reen confessed to his fellow classmates that he was the adopted son of a baron, a noble. Surprising though it may have been, not a single one among them thought any less of him for it. The evening concluded with smiles, each of them blissfully unaware of the 2 ominous figures who were watching their train head into the distance. Chapter 2. May came, filling the town of Trista with greenery. Meanwhile, Class 7's schedule was growing busier by the day. Reen found himself at odds with Machias for keeping his noble status a secret. But he also learned more about his fellow classmates, including the fact that Emma was caring for a black cat named Celine. As the days passed, the time for their second field study arrived, and the newly organized Group A was assigned to Eustace's hometown of Bereahard. This would hardly make the trip easy, however, as the utterly incompatible Eustace and Machias were forced to be part of the same team yet again. To the surprise of no one, the boys were bickering in record time. The trivial squabbles, one after another, resulted in a number of setbacks, something they became keenly aware of when one particularly heated argument resulted in Reen sustaining injury during battle. Despite these moments of frustration, they at least felt that they would be able to fully complete their assigned tasks. To add to the growing unpleasantness, however, they were given a stark reminder of how grave the tension between nobles and the reformist faction were. When they discovered that the provincial army had been greatly expanding its armaments. With neither of them able to get much sleep that night, Eustace revealed to Reen that his background was less perfect than anyone in Class 7 realized. His mother was a commoner, making him a mere bastard son of Duke Alberea. Machias, overhearing this, stepped forward the next morning to make peace, and their field studies finally seemed as if it would go smoothly. No sooner had reconciliation happened, was Eustace abruptly summoned to his home, leaving the rest of the group no choice but to proceed without him. They completed their morning tasks outside the city with little trouble, but immediately upon returning to Breahard, Machias was arrested without probable cause by the provincial army. Reen, Emma, and Fee agreed that rescuing him was to be their top priority. As the three were discussing just how to go about that, they learned from a bracer passing through, Toval, of a waterway that led precisely to where Machias was being held. Conveniently, the complex waterway led to quite a few places, including the Alberea mansion, where they were soon reunited with Eustace this way, who had learned what had happened, and escaped from his home to set things right. As they approached a massive heavy door, Fee, who revealed she was once a Jaeger, made the impassable easily passable, and they were able to successfully free Machias from his cell. On their way out, they were cornered by two large dog-like beasts from the military. However, thanks in no small part to Eustace and Machias forming a successful combat link, they emerged victorious. But their celebrations were short-lived, as they were surrounded yet again. Only this time, it was by the provincial army. Even having Eustace at their side gained them no sympathy. It was only when Instructor Sarah and Rufus, Eustace's older brother, appeared that they were saved from peril. Group A's field study had come to an end, but on a much less positive note compared to their first. On the train, they gloomily discussed the factional conflict Erebonia faced. Instructor Sarah attempted to cheer them up, and succeeded, even if it was more because they were laughing at her than with her. Meanwhile, a mysterious young girl with a silver puppet nonchalantly watched them depart. Chapter 3. June heralded the beginning of Class 7's first midterms, as well as an onset of Trista's rainy season. In the midst of this, the Reinford family's maid, Sharon, was appointed caretaker of Class 7's dormitory. And with her came the revelation that Elisa was the daughter of the Reinford Company's chairman. All performing to the best of their abilities, Class 7 scored better in the midterms than any other class. This news did not go down well with the nobles of Class 1, of course, and the besmirched upper class students challenged Class 7 to a duel. Class 7 was victorious here as well, leading to a tirade of insults from Patrick Hyarms that were only stopped by Gaius's interference. The time had come for Class 7 to prepare for the next field study, and Group A's latest destination was the Nord Highlands, Gaius's homeland. The journey was exceptionally longer than anywhere they had been previously, and while briefly stopped at Rower Station, they encountered Elisa's mother, Chairman Arena. After a grueling 8-hour journey, they finally reached the Nord Highlands to the northeast. It was plain to see how Gaius had grown up with endless patience and kindness upon meeting his family, who gave Group A a warm welcome. After a night of sleep, they took off on horseback to begin working. The Highlands were as vast as they were beautiful, and their time spent there was both challenging and rewarding in equal measure. During their stay, they also happened to meet the former chairman of the Reinford Group, Gwyn Reinford, Elisa's grandfather. At night, while gazing at the stars together, Elisa privately told Reen about the discord between her and her mother, as well as about when she lost her father. Gloomy as her expression was in the beginning, she felt a weight being lifted off her shoulders the longer they talked, and it was soon replaced by her usual sweet smile. Unfortunately, the night ended with her cheeks turning as red as their uniforms, when she realized their classmates had overheard part of her and Reen's conversation. The next morning, they were informed that the watchtower surveying the border of the Calvard Republic had come under attack. The previously peaceful highlands suddenly became tense, with airships from both sides ominously circling the skies. And knowing that war could break out over a misunderstanding at any moment, Group A motioned to conduct their own inquiry into the true culprits responsible. They found out just who those culprits were from an unlikely source: Milliam, the strange girl accompanied by a silver puppet. It was her help that made their capture swift and decisive, although the man pulling the strings, known as G, or Gideon, managed to make his escape. Thanks to both Group A and the efforts of the Intelligence Division's Captain Lecter, war was successfully averted. Captain Lecter quickly arrived to take control of the situation, and just as quickly left, taking Milliam with him. It was then discovered that she was also from the Intelligence Division. Later that evening, Sarah and Sharon both witnessed G and a masked man departing on a jet-black airship. The next morning, Group A bade a sad farewell to Gaius' family and Gwen. Their field study was over. They left the land of Nord behind, knowing full well that the experience had been one they would never forget. Chapter 4. July had come, and preparations were underway for Heimdall's month-late celebration of the summer festival. At the academy, the addition of swimming lessons to the schedule put a spring into the step of Reen and his friends. However, Laura and Fee's already strained relationship was reaching a breaking point due to the gulf between their beliefs. A surprise visit from Elise, Reen's younger sister, led to an argument between the adoptive siblings. And when Reen saw her in danger soon after, he lost control of a strange power that dwelt within him. Fortunately, Crow stepped in to help, and ultimately no one was harmed in the incident. The time came for the month's field study. Unlike past studies, both groups were assigned to the same location, the Erebonia capital of Heimdall. They worked their way through the tasks given to them by Governor Regnitz, Machias' father. And a show of strength by Elliot led Laura and Fee to settle their differences through a formal duel. After the battle, Fee revealed that the Jaeger Corps she belonged to was among the strongest and was called Zephyr. After opening up to one another, their uncomfortable feud seemed to be put to rest once and for all, much to Machias and Reen's joy. The next day, a visit to Machias' house led him to reveal some of his own past. Machias concluded his story by telling his classmates that his hate for the nobility was slowly subsiding, something everyone warmly welcomed. Now back to work, Class 7 received a series of frustrating and obtuse riddles from the famed Phantom Thief B, challenging them to find something he had delightfully stolen, the Crimson Tiara. Undaunted, they rose to the challenge. Once they had recovered the tiara, they received a call from Instructor Sarah. She asked them to gather at St. Estrea's girls' school, the school that young Elise attended. They even met with Elise before the gates of St. Estrella, and she elegantly led them to a stunning indoor rose garden. More stunning than the rose garden, however, was the sight of Princess of Erebonia, Alphen Rice Arner. Actually don't know how to pronounce that. Even Prince Oliver, chairman of the Thor's board of directors, came to meet them. That night, the prince informed them of the reason that their class was put together. He explained his desire to cultivate the youth of tomorrow, those who could overcome the conflicts in the world. However, he warned that the other directors had their own ideas on what they wanted from Class 7. It was for that reason they were all left pondering harder than ever about what they could and should do as a class. Several other strange conversations followed, such as when they found out Sarah had once been a bracer, or how Reen was invited to be Alphin's dance partner. And finally, they were asked for help with an important mission by Captain Claire. Specifically, they were asked to help with security for the festival, which was believed to be the target of terrorists. The next morning, they began their patrols of the festival as requested. The parade came to an end without incident, but just as they thought they were in the clear, chaos erupted in Dreikel's plaza. Reen and friends quickly realized this was a diversion, and leaving Toa in charge, they hurried to Princess Elfin's side. Upon arriving, they found the garden party where she was in attendance under attack by the terrorists. The attack was led once again by G, and Princess Elfin and Elise were both taken hostage. Reen's party pursued them beneath the city. G summoned a mighty bone dragon, and, while quite the challenge, they were able to defeat it. Though the dragon had fallen, 3 more members of the terrorist group made their appearance, V, S, and their leader, C. C challenged Reen, Laura, and Fee to a duel, and his victory proved both swift and effortless. It wasn't long before the railway military police found their way into the catacombs as well, and the terrorists fled the scene, triggering an explosive in the process. As they made their escape, they finally announced their organization's name, the Imperial Liberation Front. The 3-day-long festival came to an end, and Class 7 readied themselves to return to Trista. They were seen off by Princess Elfin, Elise, Governor Regnitz, and Crown Prince Cedric. But before they could leave, an unexpected man arrived to also bid them farewell. It was the Blood and Iron Chancellor, Gileath Osborne, the man behind driving the Bracer Guild for most of Erebonia. Disregarding that Sarah was clearly not happy to see him, he gave his own encouragement to Class 7, telling them, nurture the bonds you share, and train up bodies and wills of steel. As he spoke, Reen felt an aching in the left side of his chest, causing Elise to look on with concern. Chapter 5. The heat of August beat down on Trista, but none of Class 7's nobles elected to return home, as was their right. So it was that all were present to greet 2 surprising mid-year additions to the class. The first was a familiar face. Second-year student Crow Armbrust was forced to join their ranks in order to make up credits, while the second, young Milliam Orion, was an operative from the intelligence division that they had met in Nord. Contrary to expectations, it wasn't long before Milliam fit in so well, it was as if she had always been there. The time for their next field study came, and Group A was sent to Laura's hometown of Legram. And once they completed their field study tasks, they were instructed to meet with Group B and travel to Corellia Fortress. In Legram, they were reunited with Toval and helped to train several Arcade school students. Reen also had the chance to duel Laura's father, Viscount Arcade, also widely known as the Radiant Blade Master. The Viscount sensed Reen's fear of using his hidden abilities and forced him into utilizing them anyway. and through this, he taught him the importance of accepting yourself for who you are. The next day, the noble faction's leader, Duke Cayenne, paid a surprise visit to the town. Troubled by recent developments in the faction, Viscount Sade left Legram with Toval, and Group A was left to look after the town while completing their remaining tasks. That night, they had to travel to a nearby castle to rescue 2 young children who had wandered inside its perilous corridors. Thanks to Emma's knowledge of the occult and the timely aid of a mysterious knight, they managed to do so. The next morning, they departed Legram, as per their schedule, and made their way to the Seldic station to meet with Group B. There, they saw a special train taking Chancellor Osborne and Prince Oliver to a trade conference in Crossbell. To Reen's surprise, he saw it pass in slow motion, as he could clearly see Osborne, Oliver, and Toa on board. The 2 groups reunited soon thereafter, finally making their way towards Corellia Fortress. The fortress stood as a vast wall between Erebonia and its longtime enemy, the Calvard Republic, while also possessing 2 huge railway guns capable of targeting Crossbell City, which stood between the two. Upon arriving, they were shown inside by Major Neidhart, their military science instructor at the academy. They soon met Elliot's father, Lieutenant General Craig, and witnessed a military exercise. They were stunned by the overwhelming power the weaponry on display possessed. In the end, each of them left with a sinking feeling that all the combat skills they were learning at Thor's were for naught. Once they recovered from the shock of yesterday's events, they were given a lecture by Sarah and Neidhart. They were soon bombarded with news of terrorists attacking Crossbell, specifically the site of the trade conference. And no sooner had they heard this did the fortress itself come under attack by out-of-control, unmanned tanks. This was followed by the arrival of 2 black airships belonging to the Imperial Liberation Front. Amid the chaos, Class 7 resolved to aid Sarah and Neidhart in subduing the terrorists. They learned their aim was to activate the 2 railway guns and use them to attack the trade conference. And that by doing so, they intended to bury Chancellor Osborne, with little concern over how many innocents died with him. After a fierce battle, Group A defeated S, now known as Scarlet, one of the terrorist executives. Meanwhile, Group B defeated V, revealed to be Vulcan, and together they were able to prevent the worst-case scenario. Regrettably, both terrorist executives were allowed to escape by the sudden arrival of an airship. And the voice of their leader, C, delivered a chilling warning of their next attack before the airship took to the skies. Chapter 6. In September, Thor's board of directors convened for their regular meeting. The 3 directors, each related to a member of Class 7, debated how the academy ought to be run. They ended up voting on whether Class 7 would continue their field studies in light of the events at Corellia Fortress. Prince Oliver delivered a rousing speech in favor of their continuation, and in the end, all 3 directors consented, paving the way for September's field studies to go forward. Meanwhile, all of Thor's was in the midst of preparing for the Academy Festival that was scheduled for the end of October, and Class 7 was struggling to think of something that they could do for it with their small numbers. Eventually, inspiration came to them in the form of a hint from Toa. Their contribution would be a live musical performance on stage. The day came for their next field study to begin, and they were summoned to the Academy field. Once there, They heard an unusual, surprising sound. A crimson airship hovered above them. Its name was the Courageous, and notably on board were Prince Oliver Toval and its captain, Viscount Arcade. It was decided that Class 7 was to be taken to their field study location by airship, and everyone stepped on board. After the Courageous was shown off to the people of Heimdall, it flew over Rower, where Group A alighted. Rower was a large industrial city, home to the Reinford Group's corporate HQ and Reinford family residence. Once there, they set about working through the tasks Elisa's mother, Irina Reinford, gave them. But later that day, they came upon a dire conflict between the provincial army and railway military police. Rufus and Captain Claire's appearance prevented things from escalating further, but it was clear that something was amiss. That night, Elisa's mother was forced to cancel dining with them, irritating Elisa to no end. Elisa later revealed to Reen more about her family and her concerns relating to Irina's destructive work ethic. No sooner had they finished speaking did Reen receive a call from Captain Claire, who asked if the two could meet privately at a nearby bar. He agreed, but the call did not escape Fee's notice. Reen spotted her as he left the building, and the two decided to meet Captain Claire together. The captain informed them of conflicts within the Reinford group, and mentioned how there was a chance the RMP could personally investigate the matter. The next morning, Class 7 agreed to look into the matter of the conflicts themselves, along with their new field study tasks. While they were doing so, a more pressing problem arose: a fire at the military factory in town. And no sooner had it been resolved did they receive word that terrorists had occupied Sashin Iron Mine. The provincial army sealed the mine off under the pretext of protecting the hostages from being harmed. But it was clear to all that their true aim was to stop the railway military police from going inside. While Group A pondered their options, Angelica and George arrived in the city after a long bike ride. Angelica believed her family was involved in all of this, and that she had a duty to stand up and fight. They all agreed to help her, and Elisa went to see her mother to try and find another way into the mine. Irina, seeing her daughter's newfound determination, gave them a keycard, allowing them to sneak into the mine. They traveled through an underground passage connecting Rower and the mine, and began searching for the miners. Partway through the mine, they found most of the hostages, and Crow volunteered to take them back to the surface with him. Thanks to George's guidance, they eventually reached the central control room, where they found Vulcan. He revealed that he had once been a Jaeger, one that Fee herself knew of. They defeated him, but then the terrorist leader, C, appeared. Unlike their first bout in Heimdall, however, Group A was finally able to best C in battle. However, C managed to escape, and in their place rose the familiar sight of the terrorists' black airship. At that moment, the RMP and Provincial Army made their way in, but they immediately began bickering amongst themselves. C's derisive words filled the air as the airship rose upwards, and were all of a sudden replaced by the sound of a gunshot. Its engine hit, the airship exploded into a violent mess mid-air before their eyes. The Provincial Army saw this as a vital chance to take control of the scene, but those hopes were quickly dashed when Prince Oliver intervened. He effortlessly took command and ordered a full investigation into what happened. Any and all disputes were effectively dissolved. In addition, Captain Claire and Sharon had a cryptic conversation that very same night. Intermission. The following is a summary of events from the drama CD, Returning Home. I actually don't know this information. I don't think I'm... Interesting. At the close of September, Class 7 was summoned to Valflame Palace in Heimdall. There, they were to be recognized for their bravery at both Gorelia Fortress and the Sashin Iron Mine. It turned out their presence had been requested by none other than the Emperor of Erebonia himself, Eugent III. They were granted an audience with them. Empress Priscilla, Prince Olivert, and Cedric, and Prince Elfin. Princess Elfin. During their visit, they also encountered Chancellor Osborne and Governor Regnitz, as well as the heads of the four great houses, Duke Alberea and Cayenne, and Marquise Ragnar and High Arms. Emperor Eugent invited Class 7 to take a short vacation in a hot springs town that had ties to the imperial family. That town was none other than Amir, where Reen grew up. They went by special train, followed by a cable car for the last leg of the trip. And soon they found Amir, which was full of fall foliage. Upon arriving, they were shown to the Phoenix Wings, a gift from the imperial family, where they would stay for the duration of their trip. They left their belongings in their rooms, then held a meeting to figure out everyone's roles in the concert for the Academy Festival. And while some members of the group had objections, everyone eventually agreed to Reen, Elliot, and Crow's various proposals. Afterwards, Reen was reunited with his father, Baron Theo Schwarzer, and his mother, Lucia Schwarzer. They were not related to him by blood, but they welcomed him as warmly as any biological parents would. Reen's father gave him a letter from Master Kafai, who seemed aware that Reen was still hesitating. All his classmates could do was watch over him as he continued to do so. That night, after his classmates had gone to bed, Reen received a surprising request from Angelica. She told him that her father had forced her to withdraw from the academy, and as a parting gift, she asked him to accept her orbital bike. Unsure what to do, he was unable to answer immediately, and decided to think about it in the open-air bath. Talking to Laura and Elisa there eased his spirits, but as they spoke, he saw something that shocked him. It was snow, something he wouldn't have expected to see in early October. Snow continued to fall heavily well into the following morning, suggesting that something was amiss. Reen decided to find out what. In some ways, Reen took this chance as a chance to overcome a similar traumatic experience that had occurred 8 years prior. His classmates happily accompanied him without a second thought. Soon enough, they encountered a giant monster made of ice. After a fierce battle, they defeated it and came to face with Blue Blanc of Ouroboros. He was fascinated by the many mysteries surrounding Reen, even going so far as to taunt him. But Reen refused to be taken in by such pettiness, and Blue Blanc was forced to retreat. In the end, they were able to stop the strange snow and return to Ymir unharmed. As Baron Schwarzer bade farewell to them, he handed his son a scroll that he had received from Master Kafai. It was an 8 leaves, 1 blade, intermediate level scroll, which would give Reen a new target to work for. They said their farewells and finally left for the trip back to the academy, with Reen feeling as though they had all grown greatly as a result of the experience. Yeah, I never even read that. That's not in the game, and I never saw the drama CDs, so interesting. I learned something new. Final chapter. Safely back from their brief trip to Ymir, Reen and his classmates began practicing for their upcoming concert. Under the watchful eyes of Elliot and Crow, they put all all they had into their practice sessions. And thanks in part to the fact that they weren't all complete amateurs, they were finally ready to perform. The time came for the preparatory day before the festival. Rin chose a classmate to accompany him to collect the finished outfits for the boutique in Heimdall. But walking out with the outfits in tow, he ran into someone he wasn't expecting to see. It was the famous opera singer, Vita Clotilde, also known as the Azure Diva. Though Rin was more familiar with her as Misty, the host of a radio program broadcast in Trista. Having met her once already, Rin took the chance to invite her to attend the festival and watch their concert. The time finally came for the 2-day-long festival to begin. Rin spent the first 2 days helping the student council, visiting attractions with classmates in his spare time. As the day came to an end, Class 7 gathered for a final meeting to discuss the concert being held the next day. During their discussions, however, they heard the sound of a bell chiming from far away. The source of the chiming turned out to be the old schoolhouse that they had become so well acquainted with. Given permission by Sarah and Principal Van Dyke, they descended to the lowest floor. Each and every one of them were stunned by its new appearance. Guided by Emma and Celine, who seemed to know something, they resolved to restore the building back to normal. Eventually, they found themselves in what could only be described as an otherworldly battlefield, face to face with a monstrous black shadow. After a challenging battle, they were able to defeat it, overcoming the trial that it represented. They were transported and knocked out in the aftermath. But once they had opened their eyes, they discovered the building was back to normal. Suddenly, a door that was before them opened. On the other side stood a giant humanoid, a 7-arched tall, ash-colored knight. The next day, the second day of the festival began. Rin managed to put the knight out of his mind enough to focus on showing Elise, who had come to visit, around the academy campus. During that afternoon, the time finally came for their concert. Each of them gave their all to their performance, and they were able to finish both songs. When the audience feverishly called for an encore, Class 7 was more than prepared to perform a third. During the third song, the audience was invited to sing along, and the concert proved to be an immense success. After the concert, the after-party began. Rin thanked Crow for all that he had done for him. Encouraged by Elise, Rin also decided to spend some one-on-one time with someone close to him. Unfortunately, the party was brought to an abrupt end by a shocking proclamation from Principal Van Dyke. He appeared to tell them that Corellia Fortress in the east had vanished without a trace. A week passed since then, and the air in Erebonia was more tense than ever before. It was concluded that the fortress's disappearance was due to an attack by Crossbell State, and it was shortly announced that Chancellor Osborne would be making a speech to the nation at noon. Rin and his classmates chose to listen to the speech through a radio in their classroom. Only Crow was missing, having supposedly gone to Heimdall to hear the speech in person. The time for the speech finally came. Osborne's final words were forceful and provocative, making it clear that it would end in a declaration of war. Just spoil it. Not just against Crossbell, but against Kelvard Republic as well, who was believed to be backing the state. However, just as he was about to make that decisive declaration, the sound of a gunshot resounded throughout the skies of the capital, and they became his final words. The left side of Osborne's chest was pierced, and he collapsed to the ground in a pool of his own blood. The sniper who shot him was none other than C, the Imperial Liberation Front leader, who was believed to have met his end in Ruhr. And his true identity was revealed to be one of the members of Class 7, Crow Armbrust. Meanwhile, the students of Thors were able to witness the whole string of events through the radio broadcast. At first, they were merely listening to what was happening, but then Misty spoke directly to them. After she spoke, the classroom was filled with an echo of an eerie chant, and a window into what was happening appeared before them. Emma shared details about Vida, the Witch of the Abyss, whom she described as something of a sister to her. However, they were all shocked by what was happening too shocked by what was happening to pay any real attention to her words. As they watched the glimmering visions of the capital before them, a giant silver airship appeared from above the clouds. From it began to fall countless humanoids, all of which immediately set about taking over the city. They were 7 arch tall knights known as Panzer Soldats, made with modern orbital technology. The Noble Alliance had built them some time in advance, all in preparation for this day. The Soldats used their incredible mobility to overwhelm the main battle tanks guarding Heimdall, and in no time at all, they reached Valflame Palace, making it their occupation of the city complete. In command of that operation were members of Zephyr, the Jaeger Corps that Fee once belonged to. Nearby, Vida Clotilde stood on top of Heimdall's opera house, blissfully watching the silver arc descend on the palace. She was met by Bou Blanc, who praised her work, addressing her as Ouroboros' second Anguis. With an elegant smile, she accepted his words, then confidently issued a proclamation. The bells are tolling for a crossbell, and preparations here are complete. Still, even this grand an undertaking is but a jewel in the greater crown, the second stage of the Orpheus final plan. The symphony awaits us. Let the second movement commence. Meanwhile, Rain and his classmates weren't allowed much time to process what they had just seen. Not long after their window into Heimdall closed, they realized the Soldats were fast approaching Trista too. Sarah, Nightheart, the principal, and several other instructors defended the west exit valiantly. Eventually, they also received the aid of Sharon, who revealed herself to be an enforcer of Ouroboros. But while they still had their hands full, another group of Soldats began approaching from the east of town. As such, Class 7 resolved to protect the east exit themselves. The battle for Trista began. First, Class 7 fought against a Draken Soldat, and by aiming for its joints, they emerged victorious. But in a sad twist of fate, they were powerless to defeat the much stronger Spiegel unit the terrorist Scarlet was piloting. Rain resolved to use the power deep within him as a last resort. Dost thou desire power? But before he could, he heard a voice resound in his mind. He was standing in a strange empty space. Before him stood Celine, who urged him to call the voice's name. Loudly and clearly, he did just that. Heed my call, Valimar, the Ashen Knight. With a bang, the humanoid that they had found in the old schoolhouse came flying through the air towards them. It landed and Reen entered its core along with Celine. Although he had never seen the inside of such a thing before, he instinctively knew how to pilot it. And with that knowledge, he was able to easily best Scarlet Spiegel. The air was filled with the cheers of his classmates, but they were soon silenced by a familiar voice. Whoa, hold up a sec. Aren't you forgetting something? It came from above. The source of the voice was a large blue humanoid, one similar to the Divine Knight Reen was piloting. It was the Azure Knight, Ordine, piloted by none other than Crow. Reen despaired at the thought of having to fight him after all the time they had spent together. He tried whatever he could to reason with him, desperately attempting to avoid any further conflict. Yet Crow refused to listen, and with a wry smile, he declared that the Crow Reen had thought he knew was never real. Nonetheless, Reen made one last-ditch attempt at trying to change his mind. So that's the plan if you win, huh? But what about if I win? Reen trusted that Crow would come back to him and the rest of Class 7 if he proved victorious, and the battle between the two Divine Knights began. The power of Crow's Azure Knight was immense, but Reen fought back as hard as he could, and he found himself able to fight on equal terms. Finally, Reen saw the decisive opening he had been searching for. Enlightened domination. The Azure Knight fell to its knees from the impact of Valimar and Reen's attack. His classmates cried out with relief, but that relief was not to last. The next moment, the Azure Knight transformed, surging with mana. It drew closer to the Ashen Knight. Reen was stunned. All it took was a single hit from Ordine to send him flying backwards, defeated. His consciousness began to fade, and all he could do was wince in fear as the Azure Knight approached. No, you don't. Without hesitation, his classmates stood between him and Ordine in a protective stance. They didn't have a chance of defeating it, but they were determined not to let it draw any closer to Reen. Together, they resolved to buy him the time to escape, believing that he could one day bring the war to an end. Reen tried to protest, but Selene ordered Valimar to retreat from the area. Reen cried out an objection, his consciousness growing ever fainter. From outside, one of his close friends bade him a private farewell. It was clear from their voice how much they cared for him, how prepared they were to face anything, even death. Fighting back tears, Reen cried out to them as the Ashen Knight took to the skies. All he could do was watch from above as the hopeless battle began. "No, they need me. Let me stay." His cries resounded endlessly throughout the crimson sky. And that's the end of Part 1. On to Part 2. I just realized that these ones are going to be very long. Awaking to pain coursing through his body, Reen slowly rose to his feet. Taking a moment to survey his surroundings, he quickly realized he was somewhere in the Isengard mountain range. This land was so far away from Trista was a place of peaceful tranquility. Selene and Valimar, who was silently kneeling nearby, had been waiting for Reen to regain consciousness. The familiar relayed the situation to the still confused and panicking Reen. A month had passed since that fateful day he was torn from his friends. On top of that, it was now impossible to return to the place he'd last seen them. As Reen tried to quickly descend the mountain and get back to civilization, his path was stopped by a giant weapon not seen since the Dark Ages, a magic knight. Still injured from his fight against Crow, Reen had trouble withstanding the construct's relentless strikes and was soon brought to his knees. Showing no pity for his struggling opponent, the magic knight raised its blade to deliver the final blow. But at that last moment, its mighty swing was interrupted by a powerful orbal art. The magic knight was thrown off balance and tumbled over the edge of the cliff. Looking in the direction where the attack came from, Reen saw that his savior was none other than the bracer Tovol. With him were Princess Alphen and Reen's sister Elise. They took an utterly exhausted Reen back with them to his nearby home of Amir, a mountain town known as the Hot Springs Paradise. Seeing its beautiful snowy landscape once more brought Reen a measure of peace, though he was still anxious to know what had happened to his friends. He would find out later that day when, at the Schwarzer residence, his parents, Toval, and the others filled him in on everything that had happened in the past month. It was then his hopes were confirmed. Though they had been scattered and their whereabouts unknown, his friends were still safe. He had also learned that Elise and Alphen had gone through a lot to get to safety themselves. Once their discussion was over, Reen paid a visit to the local hot spring in order to collect his thoughts. None of this would have happened if he had been strong enough to fight off the Noble Alliance forces, strong enough to protect his friends. As he assaulted himself with such harsh thoughts, Elise appeared and gave him some much-needed encouragement. Moved by her kindness, Reen was able to remember the resolve his friends had shown before they were separated. Believing in the faith his friends had given him was just the motivation Reen needed. He resolved to search the country until he had reunited with every last one of them. However, his harsh fate struck again when he least expected. While Reen and the others were on an expedition outside town, Jaegers appeared and attacked Amir. Hearing gunshots, Reen ran back to find his parents collapsed on the ground, his father covered in blood. Seeing this, a roar of rage and despair burst forth from Reen, echoing throughout the town. Driven by hatred, he lost himself in his power and ruthlessly dispatched the Jaegers. Fortunately, Elise's intervention and the news that Baron Schwarzer was still alive were able to bring Reen back to his senses. Appearing before the relieved group, Vita apologized for the incident and made it clear to them that this was the result of Duke Elberea acting on his own. As a show of good faith, she erased the Jaegers' memories of having found the town and cast a spell on them that would keep it safe for a time. This strange moment of kindness caught the group off guard. Just long enough for a girl in black riding a strange puppet to swoop down on them. Taken by surprise, they had no chance to retaliate as the girls seized both Elise and Alphen. Unable to chase after them, all Reen could do was assure them that he'd come to their aid. Act 1. In order to locate his missing friends, Reen first headed to the market town of Seldik. It was there he found Machias, Elliot, and Fee, who had gone into hiding in a windmill outside of town. From there, they decided they would try to find a way to the Guerrilla Proving Grounds, where the 4th Armored Division was stationed. Slipping past the tight surveillance at a Noble Alliance checkpoint, they followed the railroad tracks and reached the ruins of Guerrilla Fortress. The Proving Grounds was just ahead, but before them stood one final challenge: Trapmaster Zeno and Leonidas, the Behemoth. Both were regimental commanders of Zephyr, the Jaeger Corps Fee grew up in. The group put everything they had into fighting the two combat specialists. Just as their battle was about to heat up, they were interrupted by a squad of Panzer Soldats. The Noble Alliance was planning an attack on the Proving Grounds. Reen summoned Valimar and was able to hold his ground against them, but their greater numbers gave them the advantage. When things seemed the most dire, a hearty roar reverberated through the battle, turning the situation on its head. The roar had come from Elliot's father, Lieutenant General Craig. He had arrived, leading a squad of tanks from the 4th Armored Division. With help from the Railway Military Police, led by Captain Clare, the Noble Alliance troops were routed. Afterwards, Lieutenant General Craig gave them crucial information and suggested that the students stay with him and the Imperial Army. However, Reen's priority was to find his friends. As such, they departed the proving grounds for their next destination. The Nord Highlands, a vast plain home to the nomadic people. Arriving at Zender Gate, they spoke with Lieutenant General Zex. He told them the Noble Alliance had occupied the watchtower, meaning all communication in the area had been cut off. In order to find the members of Class 7 who were there protecting the people of Nord, Reen and the others borrowed some horses and made their way to the settlement. It was there that they were finally reunited with Gaius, Elisa, and Milliam. In order to protect the people of Nord, Reen decided to help Gaius and the others take back the watchtower. The well-coordinated plan, they were able to storm the watchtower and reach the jamming device on its roof. However, one of Ouroboros' enforcers, Blue Blanc, and Altina, the girl who had kidnapped Elise and Alphen, were waiting there for them. The tide seemed to be in Class 7's favor, yet said tide turned when Blue Blanc employed his shadow-weaving technique to immobilize them. This left Reen with no choice but to rely on the strange power within him. Yet, just as he steeled himself to do so, a series of glimmering strands struck the ground. Class 7 was suddenly freed from the shadow weaving thanks to Sharon Kruger, another enforcer of Ouroboros and current mate of the Reinford family. With her on Class 7's side, the group was able to prevail. After defeating their foes and destroying the jamming device, Class 7's adventure in Nord had concluded. They had set their sights, next, on the lakeside town of Legram, often blanketed in a veil of mist. Asking around, they discovered supernatural occurrences that had been reported in the nearby Lohengrin Castle. Arriving there, they met up with Laura and Emma, who had gone ahead to assess the situation. Together, the reunited classmates made quick work of the issue. On their way back, Emma confessed to the group that her true identity as a member of the Hexen clan. She believed she had no right to remain a part of Class 7 after keeping such an important detail secret. In response, Reen offered words of sympathy. Thanks to him, Emma's resolve to stay with Class 7 was renewed, and with that, there was only one member of the class left to find, Eustace. Their search led the group to Bereahard, a pivotal location for the Noble Alliance's forces, and one ruled by the Alberea family. Following Eustace's guidance, the group finally reunited with him in an airship stationed inside the city. However, his family's actions and position in the Noble Alliance weighed heavily on Eustace's mind, and he claimed it was impossible for him to rejoin his former classmates. In response, Reen questioned him regarding his personal feelings on the matter, which brought Eustace back to his senses. To settle things, he requested a duel against Reen. Their fight took place on a plateau located at the end of the canyon. After a heated struggle, Reen emerged the victor, and Eustace agreed to join their class once more. However, two members of Ouroboros were watching the whole thing unfold from afar. One was Duvally the Swift, head knight of the Stallritter. The other was McBurn, known as the Almighty Conflagration, and arguably the Society's mightiest member. They had been dispatched to restrain Class 7, leaving the group with little choice but to fight. Despite the students' best efforts, however, they were no match for the duo. Just as all hope seemed lost, a familiar voice rung out above them. Dropping into the scene in a blaze of her namesake purple lightning was none other than Sarah Valestein, former A-rank bracer and Class 7's homeroom teacher. Reen's side was brimming with new confidence, but before the fight could resume, they were interrupted by angry shouting coming from below. This time, it was Duke Alberea, accompanied by a squad of panzer soldaten. He had come in pursuit of his son, Usus. Calling upon Valimar once more, Reen made short work of them. Once done, they wasted no time in leaving Bereahard through the Spirit Path. With another challenge safely overcome, Class 7 had, with one exception, finally reunited. After returning to Emir and celebrating, they gathered to decide how they would face the ongoing civil war as a class. After much discussion, they agreed they would act as a third party, one affiliated with neither the Imperial Army nor the Noble Alliance. In the midst of their discussion, a voice rang out through the room, one they'd have rather not heard at such a time. A projection of Vita appeared before them, accompanied by the roar of a massive engine. They rushed outside and found the Noble Alliance's flagship, the Pantagruel, hovering above the town. On its deck were Usus's brother, Rufus, and the Azure Knight, Ordine, piloted by none other than Crow. Desperate to protect his hometown, Reen summoned Valimar to fight Crow. Yet, in the end, he was barely able to put a scratch on him. The rest of Class 7 took up arms as well, but Rufus single-handedly dispatched them with similar ease. After making it crystal clear that they lacked the means to oppose him, Duke Cayenne revealed the reason for his visit. He had come to invite Reen aboard the Pantagruel. Should Reen acquiesce, the Noble Alliance would stay away from Emir for the remainder of the war. Reen knew it was a trap, but for the sake of Elise and the others who had been taken captive, he agreed. And thus, Reen made his way aboard the Titanic ship. Intermission. Reen found himself on the Pantagruel's bridge, where the Duke invited him to join the Noble Alliance. The Duke explained that if Reen wanted to bring an end to the war, joining him would make it happen, all the more quickly. Rufus urged him to consider the offer, telling Reen every soldier must decide for himself if a cause is worth fighting for. Escorted to a private room to think it all over, Reen found himself at a loss over what to do. In the midst of his thoughts, Crow paid him a visit. Unexpected visit, of course. Realizing that he hadn't changed much in spite of everything, Reen began to question him. Why did he loathe Chancellor Osborne so much? What led him to form the Imperial Liberation Front? Unable to resist Reen's earnest questions, Crow gave in and agreed to talk. At a young age, he had lost both his hometown and family to Osborne's schemes. He then wandered the country until he met Duke Cayenne. The two allied over their shared grudge for Osborne, and funded by the Duke, Crow sought out like-minded people to form the Imperial Liberation Front. During this time, Vita, who had been in contact with Duke Cayenne, guided Crow to become Ordine's Awakener. Finally, he enrolled himself in Thor's as a cover for his true goal: to assassinate Gileath Osborne and rid Erebonia of him once and for all. After Crow left, Reen took the opportunity to wander around the ship and gather intel before finally heading to the guest of honor's room, where he found none other than Princess Elphin. According to her, Elise was currently being held with the rest of the Imperial family. Hearing this, Reen began to considering again how joining the Noble Alliance to end the war quickly might be the best choice, for Elise's sake. No sooner had the words left his mouth than Elphin launched into a heartfelt speech to set him straight. She told him he shouldn't use Elise as his excuse, not when Elise's greatest desire was for Reen to follow the path he believed in most. This opened Reen's eyes to the realization that those who he cherished felt the same about him. The power he once feared would no longer torment him. All he had to do was listen to his heart. and his heart's message was loud and clear. He would take Elfin and escape from the airship. With the help of his power, he was able to shake off all who stood in his way. After escaping onto the deck, they found Crow there waiting for him. This led to a duel between Reen and Crow, no Divine Knights involved. Reen was able to use his power to gain the upper hand. But said power ran dry before he could land a decisive blow. What's worse, it gave time for those pursuing him to finally reach the deck too. With nowhere left to run, the situation couldn't have been any more dire. Suddenly, a red streak zoomed through the skies overhead. The Courageous had come to the rescue. A number of trusty allies leapt from the cruiser and landed on the Pantagruel's deck. Emma teleported herself and the rest of Class 7 aboard as well. Reen was both relieved and stunned at this turn of events, but the biggest surprise had yet to come. Prince Olivert, owner of the Courageous and chairman of Thor's, also made his appearance. With both sides evenly matched, the two groups found themselves at a stalemate, and the Noble Alliance decided to withdraw. Finally, all its allies safely aboard, the Courageous set off, flying away at full speed. Act 2. The members of Class 7 were reunited again. There was no time to celebrate, however, and they quickly set about discussing their next course of action. The main topic was one posed by Prince Olivert. What did the members of Class 7 intend to do from here on? Reen took it upon himself to answer in his classmates' stead, stating their experience with the country's problems made them uniquely qualified to help. Hearing this, the prince handed control of the Courageous to Class 7 and announced he and Viscount Arcade were headed to Western Erebonia to help with the war effort there. Before they left, the Viscount appointed Toa acting captain of the airship. Toa suggested that they narrow down their goals to a more manageable what and how. For the former, they decided their first order of business should be to take back Thor's from the Noble Alliance. As for the how, they would increase their numbers by finding their fellow students scattered across the country and bringing them aboard the ship. Sometime after settling on their new goal, they were contacted out of the blue by Angelica. According to her, the Rhineford Company had been occupied by her uncle, a member of the Noble Alliance. What's more, they had also detained the company's chairman, Irina, Elise's mother. Hearing this, Class 7 rushed to Ruhr, home of the company's headquarters, and met up with Angelica. She had tried to convince her father to withdraw from the Noble Alliance, but it was to no avail. Thus, she had decided to take matters into her own hands, resolving to rid Ruhr of the Noble Alliance, no matter what it took. After convincing Angelica to let them help, Class 7's first order of business was to rescue Irina. Fortunately, Angelica had already located her. She was being held on a train currently stopped within the Sashan iron mine. They managed to rescue her, then immediately returned to the RF building and proceeded to reclaim it from the troops stationed there. One final battle awaited them, a duel between Angelica and her father. In the end, Angelica stood tall as the victor, bringing a close to the century's greatest family feud. Accepting his defeat, Marquis Ragnar announced his withdrawal from the war entirely. As had become the norm, however, things would not proceed quite so smoothly. Vulcan, a member of the Imperial Liberation Front, appeared in a gargantuan soldat to challenge Reen. With Vulcan's new model of Panzer Soldat, while it proved a difficult foe, Reen was eventually able to best it. However, the battle put a significant strain on the massive Soldat systems, putting it at risk of self-destructing. Having already decided this would be his final resting place, Vulcan let himself be taken by the explosion. Unable to save him, the tragic turn of events left a deep scar of regret on Reen's heart. While the situation in Rower was now under control with it, the group then set their sights on Erebonia's spirit shrines in order to create a more powerful weapon for Valimar. However, one day, they received devastating news from the 4th Armored Division. Celdic had been set ablaze. I think it might actually be Celdic. Sorry. Under orders from none other than Duke Alberea himself. Eustace attempted to leave the group to confront his father on his own. Before he could, however, they received word from Rufus. He informed them that the Noble Alliance did not sanction the attack and would not come to the Duke's aid, should Class 7 wish to deal with the situation themselves. Eustace was resolved to face his father, and so the group swiftly flew to Auroch's fort in Bereahard. I've been saying Celdic this whole time. Whoops. Making it past the defenses and into the fortress, they faced their real challenge. An incredibly powerful Panzer Soldat stood in their way. Its pilot was the Imperial Liberation Front, Scarlet, and much like Vulcan, she challenged Reen, hoping to find a resting place of her own. As before, Reen proved triumphant, and in a further parallel to his last encounter with the ILF, the strain of the battle caused Scarlet Soldat to begin to self-destruct. Without an ounce of hesitation, Reen dashed in. With a single precise slash, he tore off the Soldat's cockpit and leapt away from the explosion. Though her machine was in pieces, Scarlet herself was unscathed. Reen had saved her. His relief at seeing she was fine was cut short by a familiar voice. It was Crow. He had come out of concern for his last remaining team member. Seeing she was safe, he left the group with some parting words of encouragement before flying off. Class 7 was able to successfully capture the fort and came face to face with Duke Alberea. After he realized his allies had abandoned him, he lost the will to go on and was arrested by his own son. When this was announced, the soldiers still working under the Duke retreated, effectively ending House Alberea's role in the war. The Noble Alliance was shaken by the loss of yet another one of the four great houses. In a final gambit, they gathered a majority of their forces around Heimdall. In doing so, they loosened their grip on the rest of the country, however. At long last, the time had come for Class 7 to take back Trista. After they drove back the remnants of the Noble Alliance troops still stationed in town, its residents gave their liberators a warm welcome home. Amid cheers of support, Class 7 headed to Thor's military academy, intent on freeing the campus itself as well. At the gates, they were greeted by the upper-class students who placed in charge of the academy, led by Patrick. Considering themselves Class 7's rivals, they wished to stake their pride and honor on one final battle. After a fierce clash between the two groups of students, Class 7 proved victorious. Finally, acknowledging Reen as an equal, Patrick and the other noble students joined them. With all the students of Thor's under one banner, the Academy now truly represented a third path for Erebonia. Finale. Shortly after their liberation of Trista, Class 7 received a request from the Imperial Army. They asked them to rescue the Imperial family and Elise, who were being held captive at Karel Imperial Villa. The fact that the students weren't affiliated with either faction made them perfect for the task. Under Toa's command, they began their mission the next day. After reaching the villa and arriving at the top floor, they found the Imperial family, the Imperial Governor, and Elise. Altina and her puppet appeared and tried to stop them, but Class 7 prevailed against them as they had all others before. With no more obstacles in their way, Reen was reunited with Elise at long last. Their job wasn't over yet, though, as the group learned Duke Cayenne had taken Prince Cedric. As they tried to question Altina about where the prince had been taken, a pillar of light erupted from the capital. It was centered where Valflame Palace should have been, but in the palace's place rose something dark and twisted. The Infernal Castle. According to Emma, it was summoned forth by the Hexen clan's most forbidden incantation. Reen, however, could feel Crow's presence within the castle. He knew he was waiting for him there. With that, Class 7 resolved to make their way into the imposing structure. Inside, members of both Ouroboros and Zephyr stood in their way. Though the students put up valiant fights, their foes were just too strong. Well-timed aid from their more experienced allies allowed them to continue advancing through the castle, however. After a long climb, they finally reached the Vermilion Throne, their final destination. Crow and Vita were there waiting for them. Duke Cayenne, standing next to an unconscious Prince Cedric, began to speak. He told them that he was there to fulfill the ambitions of his ancestor, Empress Orthros, the one known as the False Emperor during the War of the Lions. His goal was to take control of the Infernal Castle, the Vermilion Knight, and the Empire. Intent on putting a stop to Duke Cayenne's plans, Reen once again took up his sword to save Prince Cedric, and to settle things with Crow once and for all. Crow and Vita also took up arms, and a battle unlike any other began. It would be no easy battle, however, as Crow and Vita showed surprising levels of teamwork. Class 7 couldn't afford to lose this fight, though. Far too much was riding on it. Mustering everything they had, they were eventually able to eke out a victory. This wasn't the end, however. Once the battle was over, both Reen and Crow jumped into their Divine Knights. Pouring his feelings into his new blade, Reen stood face to face against Crow once more. Their battle pushed each of them well beyond their limits, but in the end, it was Crow who was brought to his knees. It was an outcome so incredible, the rest of Class 7 could scarcely believe it. Reen's friends wasted no time surrounding and congratulating him once he disembarked. Crow and Vita accepted their loss, signaling the Noble Alliance's defeat and marking the end of the war. Or rather, that's how things should have gone. In desperation, Duke Cayenne revived the entity responsible for the calamity 250 years prior, forcing the captive Cedric into its core, the Vermilion Apocalypse. It drew its power from the Vermilion Knight and the member of the Arner family housed within it. Once the creature was freed, it wasted no time training mana from all across the Empire. Thinking quickly, Vita activated a barrier that prevented Class 7 from suffering the ill effects of its power. But it was only a matter of time before the Apocalypse's overwhelming power broke through it. It was enough time for Crow to devise a strategy, however. The two Awakeners awaited their chance to take on this apocalyptic foe, boarding their Divine Knights after Class 7 fought it off long enough for Valimar and Ordine to recover. Their target, now, was the Vermilion Apocalypse's core, where Cedric was being held. Crow took it upon himself to draw the Vermilion Apocalypse's attention in order to give Reen an opening. In doing so, however, he allowed it to deal a blow that pierced Ordine's chest. "I'm fine. It barely scratched me. You keep going. You're the only one who can save him now, so don't you dare look back." Reen was shaken by the sight of this, yet Crow's words of encouragement were all he needed to close the distance to their target. After a mighty blow, he had succeeded in ripping the monstrosity's core from his chest. The creature bellowed out in agony before fading away for good. With that, Heimdall had been saved from an impending disaster. Cedric himself was safe and sound too, which came as a huge relief to the group, but it wasn't long before they noticed Crow wasn't with them. They turned their attention to Ordine in search of him, only to see the Divine Knight had fallen to its knees. A pallid Crow emerged from within, clutching at his chest. Rushing to his aid, the group realized he had suffered a wound identical to Ordine's. Emma and Celine tried their best to heal him, but it only delayed the inevitable. As his life slipped through his grasp, he apologized to Reen for being unable to keep his promise to Toa and the others. With his final breath, he told his friends to keep fighting for the future. Keep going forward, relentlessly, without looking back. Then, as he sank into Reen's arms, Crow quietly passed away. Yet, before they could even recover, Duke Cayenne let out an enraged bellow. In a desperate final bid for victory, he held Cedric at knife point. Vita, less than pleased with his selfishness, attempted to quiet him by force. But an unexpected turn of events took place. Someone else dashed onto the scene, cutting down Vita's familiar, Grianos, without mercy and attacking the Azure Abyss herself. To everyone's surprise, it was none other than Rufus Alberea. He announced his intent to arrest both Duke Cayenne and Vita for their actions. Those present questioned why Rufus had chosen to appear then, of all times, especially considering the Noble Alliance had already lost. Further, why was he trying to arrest people who were part of his own faction? The questions were answered by the appearance of Lecter and Claire. Rufus Alberea had, in fact, been the primary member of the Ironbloods, an organization under Osborne's direct control, all along. Duke Cayenne, equally stunned as Class 7, asked what he stood to gain by revealing this after Osborne's death. He received his answer, though not from the person he expected. The man who now stood before them was a man who should not have been alive. The man Crow had shot through the heart, Chancellor Gileath Osborne. The mission Osborne had given Rufus was to join the Noble Alliance and weaken it from within. Furthermore, the Chancellor announced that he would now be taking over Ouroboros' phantasmal blaze plan. Still grieving his friend's death, Reen approached him. Why? Why are you still alive? Crow shot you. You're supposed to be dead. Was everything he did? Was his whole life for nothing? In response to Reen's furious outburst, Rufus informed him that Osborne's actions were tied to him as well. Upon hearing this, a memory buried deep within Reen's mind resurfaced, a memory from 12 years ago, just before he was adopted by the Schwarzer family. Reen, I pray you grow up strong and healthy. Oh, Adios, if you're listening, hear me now. Please allow this child. As Reen stood there dazed, pondering what this memory could possibly have meant, a ruthless grin spread across Osborne's face. I'm glad to finally see you again, my son. You've grown into a fine young man. Indeed, the Empire will soon know of a Ashen Chevalier, the hero whose brave deeds allowed us to reclaim the capital. And who better to assist me than a national hero? Divertissement. 2 months after the end of the war, an unexpectedly swift invasion from Erebonia left the city-state of Crossbell entirely under its control. Calvard, however, was not about to sit by and let its rival claim more land. The Republic sent its own troops in as a counteroffensive. Reen, having been named the Ashen Chevalier, was sent into Crossbell to help fend them off. During this time, a speech from the state's new ruler had been scheduled at Orcus Tower. There, Chancellor Osborne appointed Rufus Alberea as the first Governor General of Crossbell. Rufus's first act was to announce that the formerly independent state would be annexed into Erebonia. Crossbell's freedom had been stripped away, yet there were those who were working to overcome this new wall before them. One was a member of the Crossbell State Police Department, Lloyd Bannings. The other was Risha Mao, a woman who led a double life as both a performer in a famous troupe and as a legendary assassin, Yin. They had made their way into Crossbell's underground network of tunnels in order to prevent the state's top-secret info from falling into Erebonia's hands. Their plan was to copy the information off the core terminal, then reformat it, helping them with their task. This task was an initialization unit one of their allies had made for them. They reached the terminal and set the unit up. All that was left was to wait for it to finish. The relief quickly faded, however, when they heard a voice call out from behind them. Turning to look, the pair came face to face with a black-haired boy and a girl dressed in black. They had received a special order to stop Lloyd and Risha's ploy. This was well within expectations, however, and Lloyd and Risha decided to hold the mysterious duo off until the data wipe was done. The opposing pair didn't seem to mind. And yet, the black-haired boy appeared to be holding back. After a short skirmish, he readied himself and began to focus his power. But no sooner had he begun than the initialization device finished its process. Unable to prevent the reformat, the boy and girl changed their objective. The boy raised his hand and called out a name, causing a huge machine to appear out of nowhere. He proceeded to board it, and without wasting a moment, he destroyed the terminal with one powerful swing. Now, this unbelievably powerful machine was blocking their only way out. Or so it seemed, until the boy allowed them to pass, telling them arrest warrants hadn't been issued for either of them. With little other choice, Lloyd and Risha swallowed their pride and made their escape. But before they left, Lloyd turned and asked the boy a question. As I'm sure you already know, my name is Lloyd Bannings, and I'm a police detective with the Crossbell State Police Department. What's your name? I'm with Thor's Military Academy, No. I'm a provincial military officer with the Crossbell government, Reen Schwarzer. Watching the two of them leave, Reen called Lecter to report his failure. Lecter spoke as though he were familiar with Lloyd and Risha, and accepted Reen's report without reprimanding him. Reen took one more glance in the direction Lloyd and Risha had fled, jealous of their ability to push on towards the future. With a quiet sigh, he took his leave from Crossbell. Epilogue. Having carried out his orders, Reen made his return to Trista. Upon arrival at the station, he came across Claire, who had been waiting there for him. Reen simply gave her a cold shoulder, however, not wanting anything to do with someone who was in leagues with Rufus and Osborne. Reen regretted turning his back on someone he once called a friend, but all he could do now was continue walking and leave the station behind. Once he did, a wave of nostalgia washed over him as he looked out at Trista once more. The excitement he felt after he and his friends freed it from the Noble Alliance was something he could never forget. And yet, despite all that, despite seeing the welcoming sight of the Lino flowers blooming again, he couldn't help but feel cold. Not long after, the rest of Class 7 arrived to greet him. Together, they made their way back to the academy. They went through their studies and tests as usual, taking care to enjoy what time they still had together as a class. Now and then, though, Rain couldn't help but think of Crow. With their final free day around the corner, Rain dropped by the engineering building, where he had found George and Angelica, who each told him about their plans to travel around Zemuria. Sensing Rain still felt guilty over his role in the battle over Crossbell, they reassured him he had, in fact, played a key role in protecting its citizens. Following this, he paid a visit to the student council room. There he found Toa fast asleep at her desk, having just finished her final duties as president. As he looked idly at her sleeping face, Rain heard her mumble Crow's name. This caused him to let out a gasp, rousing Toa from her slumber. Though unhappy that she was caught sleeping, she could tell at a glance that Rain didn't seem okay. She told him that there was no need to endure everything that life threw at him, and that it was okay to sit and rest if things got too hard. Hearing this, the feelings Rain had been holding back burst forth. He confessed his regret about losing Crow and breaking his promise to her. Toa reassured him that he did everything he could. On his way back to the dorms, Rain bumped into his classmates at the gate, and they all went home together, thinking back to their first day at the academy. They knew their time left together was short, so they were determined to make the most of it. Before they knew it, their final free day, had dawned. Sensing an odd presence at the old schoolhouse, Rain made his way over to investigate. There, he found Toval, Elise, and Elfin, who had come to visit Trista. What's more, Claire was with them, having come as Elfin's escort. Both she and Rain took this opportunity to clear the air with one another, putting them on good terms once more. As the group chatted away, a bell suddenly rang out, and the old schoolhouse began to glow. The rest of the group rushed over to find out what was going on. They ventured inside to find not the schoolhouse they knew, but a boundless corridor swirling with energy. Rain summoned Valimar, who explained a trial separate from the one they had faced during the school festival had now been activated. Though the particulars of this new trial remained unclear, Rain and the others couldn't let this opportunity pass. They agreed to explore the strange, twisted space. Eventually, reaching the end of this massive area, they found a giant white shadow resembling a divine knight waiting for them there. It claimed to govern the Shadow Trial, which was once sealed away, but brought back due to the Infernal Castle's destruction. Undeterred, Rain and the group gathered their strength. Working together, they were able to triumph. Upon its defeat, the shadow dispersed into thousands of motes of light that fluttered down like lino petals. As they celebrated their victory, it finally hit them that this would be the last time they would be able to do so together. To everyone's surprise, Milliam was the first to cry. Elisa was next. She went to hug Milliam, which in turn opened the floodgates for the rest of the class. This was the first time the group had let out the emotions that had been building up in each of them, their sadness over having to split up. The rest of the days before the end of the school year flew by all too quickly, and then it was time for them to depart. Though they were parting ways, they believed they would one day meet again. With smiles on their faces as they headed for the campus gates, each had something he or she wished to accomplish. As they all made their departure from Trista, only Rain remained. He knew the challenges that lay ahead of him for him. He would be forced to accept the government's orders for him and Valimar. But even so, he had made an important promise with his friends. Filled with determination to keep that promise, he strode forward towards his future. we're on to Trails of Cold Steel 3 next. This one's going to be pretty long, too. I guess this is going to be probably a roughly 2-hour video. Just me talking. At least we have good I love this song. It was April of 1206, and a warm breeze blew through the trees, gently scattering lino petals into the air. Reen Schwarzer stepped off the train into the suburbs west of Heimdall, a town by the name of Leaves. And his graphics super updated. Presented to the Empire as a hero of the Civil War a year ago, he had taken part in a number of military operations at the government's behest since then. Despite still being a student, he was ordered to participate in the annexations of Crossbell and Northumbria, where he turned the tides of battle with his divine knight Valimar. By this point, the name Ashen Chevalier was known throughout the country, and wherever the national hero went, heads would turn. Following his graduation, however, Reen had decided upon a new path. He would be an instructor at the newly formed branch campus of the renowned Thor's Military Academy. No sooner had he arrived than he was greeted by his friend and now colleague at the branch campus, Toa Herschel. She led him to the school to meet their other co-workers. Major Michael Irving, who came to the school from the Railway Military Police. Randolph Orlando, who had been transferred from the Imperial Army's Crossbell unit. Professor G. Schmidt, who had been assigned as the school's special advisor. And finally, Aurelia Le Guin, the former general of the Noble Alliance, now the branch campus's principal. At the school's brief entrance ceremony, class assignments and instructors for Class 8 Combat Tactics and Class 9 Military Finance were announced. However, after everyone had been divided up, Reen and 3 students remained. With a fierce grin, Principal Aurelia revealed their assignments. The remaining students would form the branch campus's Class 7 Special Operations, and Reen was to be their instructor. The new 4-person squad was then given an orienteering exercise. They were to explore a trial area teeming with monsters, Einhell Keep. As they awaited for the trial to begin, each of Reen's new students introduced themselves. Kurt Vander, the youngest son of a renowned Erebonian military family. Una Crawford, a transfer student from Crossbell's Police Academy. Altina Orion, formerly of the Imperial Army's Intelligence Division. His 3 new students in tow, Reen led them through the exercise. As they fought alongside each other to defeat the monsters that stood in their path, they learned how to better work as a team. Further, by making use of the new Brave Order function of their Arcus 2s, they were even able to defeat a magic knight that appeared suddenly at the end of the keep. With the exercise complete, Reen asked the students once more if they truly wanted to be part of the new Class 7. Though each had their own concerns, all 3 students confirmed their decision to join. With that, Reen formally announced the establishment of Special Operations. A new Class 7 was born. Chapter 1. 2 weeks had passed since the entrance ceremony, and everyone had started to settle into their daily lives. After finishing his work for the day, Reen returned to his room, only to hear an unfamiliar sound coming from his Arcus. Confused, he looked at it to find the words "Round of 7" and none other than Elliot's face on his screen. Elliot explained that it was a new communication app Prince Olivert had created specifically for Class 7's use. Glad to see his friend again, Reen and Elliot chatted well into the night. The day after was the branch campus's first free day. After a morning walk around town, Reen attended a briefing with the rest of the faculty. Major Lecter Arundel of the Intelligence Division was also in attendance. He had come to inform them of the special lessons the branch campus would soon participate in. Tagging along with Lecter on his trip was Milliam, a member of the old Class 7, and one of Reen's friends he hadn't seen in quite some time. With everyone present, Lecter handed out the plans outlining the nature of the special lessons. There have been disturbances in the west half of the Empire, the document read. Thor's newly established branch campus will be tasked with handling these threats. The students were to be sent to perform field exercises all across the Empire, where they would face such threats as hostile Jaeger Corps and even agents of the Society, Ouroboros. While the instructors reacted with a mixture of indignation and surprise, Aurelia appeared more intrigued than anything else. She believed it would help teach the students two of the concepts on the branch campus's charter, to think of the world as a battlefield and to become the foundation of the world. The others reluctantly agreed, and it was decided they would leave for Sutherland the following Friday. Later that evening, Reen was back in his room when a familiar tune began playing on the radio. To his shock, the radio show, Abend Time, had resumed after having been off for over a year. Its host, Misty, was actually Vita, an Anguis of Ouroboros, who had been missing since the end of the Civil War. Unsure of her plans, Reen decided to keep an eye on the situation. The next day, the school had its first bout of Panzersoldat training. Reen and Randolph instructed their classes on the basics of piloting the mechs before ending the lesson with mock battles. However, Ash Carbide, a student from Class 8, demanded to face Reen one-on-one. Unbeknownst to everyone but Ash, his mech's weapon had a hidden function, letting him make a sudden attack on Reen before the battle had started. Though he was taken by surprise, Reen calmly dodged the attack and proceeded to easily defeat Ash. Scoffing, Ash walked off as though he'd done nothing wrong. Though it was clear he'd be a handful in the coming school year, Reen and Randy both recognized his talent. On the day they were to leave for the field exercises, an armored train specifically for branch campus use, the Derflinger, pulled into the academy station. Major Claire Revelt of the Railway Military Police disembarked, having come to personally hand the train off. Pleased to see Reen and the others for the first time in several months, Claire announced she would be accompanying them on their trip to Sutherland. As their instructors boarded the train to depart, Aurelia bid them farewell and gave Reen some words of advice. As someone with great power, you must stay alert and always be aware of the flow of events in the world. Face that which you lack head-on. Rely on those around you when you need to. With that, the students and instructors of the branch campus set off to confront the turbulent era that awaited them ahead. The next morning marked the first day of their field exercises. They arrived at the site where they would set up camp on the outskirts of St. Arc, one of the oldest cities in Erebonia and its former capital. During their time here, each class was assigned a different set of exercises to perform. Class 7 was given two main tasks, patrolling the area and assisting the local citizens. Together, these two tasks would be classified as special ops missions. For their first order of business, Class 7 made their way to St. Arc to report the start of their field exercises to Marquis Hyarms, the noble in charge of the region. It was also there they received the tasks they would perform for their special ops missions. In addition to the list of requirements from the citizens, they received a document labeled Crucial Investigation Report. It was an investigation into a strange monster that had recently been reported around Sutherland. Reen left the students to decide how they approached the tasks. and after a bit of discussion, they had begun their first day of special ops missions. After they finished their patrol of the city, they began investigating the strange monsters. They went to the nearest sighting, just off the main road outside of the city. Suddenly, the sound of clanging metal and screeching gears filled the air, and 3 mechanical monsters appeared before them. They were archaisms, weapons developed by Ouroboros. Their suspicions confirmed, Rain and Altina dispatched the machines, with Kurt and Yuna following their lead. After the battle, they heard a gruff voice call out to them. A well-built, middle-aged man approached. He introduced himself as a hunter and spent a few moments casually chatting about the archaisms and the branch campus's field exercises before heading off. He advised the students to search the area, just in case there were any more archaisms lingering around. As they investigated the direction the hunter had come from, they found the smoking remains of several more of the machines lying in a pile at the bottom of a nearby cliff. Later in the day, the group found themselves in the Isthmia Great Forest. Suddenly, the air went still, and a mysterious blonde girl appeared before them. Reen looked around to find his student seemingly frozen. He was the only one who could see the girl. Smiling mysteriously, she gave him a cryptic message before disappearing. Unable to recall exactly what had just happened, Reen decided to keep the strange presence he had felt in the back of his mind as he left the forest with the others. As they finished their tasks in the area, they happened to run into Elliot, one of the members of the old Class 7, at the St. Art Cathedral. Since graduating, he had made his debut as a musician and was performing in the city as part of his tour. After a friendly chat, they left St. Arc and made their way to Parm, the spinning town. They arrived in Parm later that afternoon and headed out to the nearby road where more of the suspicious monsters had been sighted. As they expected, more archaisms appeared, and though they struggled against them, they were ultimately able to prevail. However, there was one more machine nearby, waiting for them to let their guard down. As soon as they did, it teleported behind Kurt and Yuna, preparing to strike. It was then that Reen dashed in, unleashing his power and making quick work of the machine with a few strikes. Using his power left Reen exhausted. Kurt and Yuna were confused by their instructor's strange ability. Altina, however, was very familiar with it, scolding Reen for calling upon it. Once they had confirmed the area was clear of archaisms, they headed back to Parm. After seeing to their other requests, they began searching the by-road south of town for anything suspicious. Before long, they came across an abandoned road that had been sealed off. Following it, they came to a gate leading further into the mountains. It had been locked with a strange chain, and a sign warning of landslides had been posted on it. As they debated what to do next, several new archaisms quickly descended upon them. Rain and his students withstood the machine's rapid strikes, eventually taking them down. Just when they thought they had won, however, enemy reinforcements arrived, blocking off their escape route. Due to the back-to-the-back battles they had been put through, the students had all but reached their limits. Rain knew he would have to rely on his power once more to protect them. He readied himself to unleash it. Just then, a blue-haired woman leapt in, seemingly from nowhere, and reduced the archaisms to scrap metal with a few swings of her massive sword. It was Laura, another member of the old Class 7. Having finally mastered her family's sword style, she had come to Parm to help at the training hall. Together, they all returned to town, and then parted ways with Laura. With their first day of special ops missions over, Reen and his students returned to camp. That evening, the instructors met up to discuss the implications of so many of Ouroboros' weapons appearing in Sutherland. Though there were a number of groups they could have reached out to for assistance, Michael decided they would have to handle the threat on their own. Before their meeting could finish, however, it was interrupted by a challenge issued from a loudspeaker and the sound of an explosion outside. The camp was under attack. The instructors rushed out to find a red-haired woman holding an anti-tank gun. It was Shirley Orlando, the sanguine ogre. By her side stood the head knight of the Stahlritter, Duvally the Swift. The two members of Ouroboros had come to give the branch campus a greeting and proceeded to call in an army of archaisms to attack. As classes 8 and 9 defended the camp, Class 7 moved out to support their classmates. While they fought off the archaisms, however, Shirley managed to blindside them and dash towards the Derflinger in an attempt to destroy it. Just when it looked as though there was no way to save the train from the sanguine ogre, a barrage of gunfire stopped her in her tracks. A girl with silver hair stood atop the train, her twin gun swords at the ready. It was Fee, another member of the old Class 7. Elliot appeared as well, playing a melody with his orbital staff to rejuvenate the branch campus students. Finally, Laura leapt into the fray, demonstrating her newfound skill by challenging Duvally. The two members of Ouroboros decided they'd had their fill and retreated, but not before warning the branch campus to stay out of the events that were about to take place. Though the Derflinger survived the attack, some of the students were seriously injured, and the Panzer Soldats had been badly damaged. With this, there was no doubt left that Ouroboros had begun to take action once more. Their second day of field exercises began on a tense and somber note. The faculty attended a briefing with Major Lecter, who had arrived earlier that morning. Michael informed them that the Imperial government had decided the branch campus would deal with these threats without the Army's aid. Upon hearing this, Reen came to a realization. As if to confirm his suspicions, Lecter then produced a document and read it aloud. Ashen Chevalier Reen Schwarzer, the following orders are on behalf of the Imperial government. The document he held out was the same kind which had forced Reen to take action on many occasions in the year and a half since the Civil War had ended. Reen accepted the orders, as he had always done. Though he disliked the way the government was using him as a pawn, he proclaimed that as a member of Class 7, there was no way he'd sit idly by if the people were in trouble. Hearing this, Laura, Fee, and Elliot entered the room and announced they would be helping. They revealed that they and the rest of the old Class 7 had enough of watching Reen take on all the unreasonable requests the government foisted on him all alone. They had decided to come together to help their dear friend. As Reen and his classmates left to go stop Ouroboros, the students confronted him, having heard about his orders. Kurt demanded to know why Reen was leaving them, and him specifically behind. In response, Reen bluntly explained Kurt wasn't skilled enough to bring to such a dangerous place. This comment touched a nerve, and Kurt stormed off. Unsure if he had been too harsh, Reen left the camp with his classmates. Upon arriving at St. Arc, the group received word from Toval, a bracer they were acquainted with. He informed them the Bracer Guild had concluded that Ouroboros was attempting to steal the Phantasmal Blaze plan back from Chancellor Osborne. With this, the group's first step was to find where the societies was hiding their stash of weaponry and archaisms. Fortunately, Agate, an A-rank bracer from Liberl, better known by his moniker The Heavy Blade, arrived to help them with their search. In order to gather intel on Ouroboros' movements, the group headed to Dreknor Fortress first. On the way there, Laura asked Reen why he hadn't been using his spirit unification technique to call upon his power. He revealed that during the Northern War, he overused his power, and it went out of control, leaving him unconscious and weakened for several days. Because of that, he had decided to not use it again, unless he absolutely needed to, unsure of what would happen if he lost control again. After arriving at Dreknor Fortress, they met with General Craig. The general agreed to hear the group out, but told them his hands were tied. After listening to the general's explanation, Reen was able to deduce that the army knew where Ouroboros was, but was unable to act due to a situation unique to Sutherland. Unable to offer them any direct assistance, General Craig decided to hand Reen and the others a document granting them access to the place Ouroboros had most likely set up as their base. However, he explained this place was home to a national secret, and thus they would need to receive Marquis Higharm's permission as well to enter. They immediately set out for St. Arc to meet with the Marquis. Upon hearing their request, he immediately agreed to grant them passage, handing them a key with a pained look in his eye. It was the key to the sealed-off road Reen and his students had found the day before. The road led to the ruins of Hamel, formerly a village of the Empire. The tragedy that took place there was a dark shadow on Erebonian history, and the ruins had since been sealed off from all, the Imperial Army and the Marquis included. Now knowing what awaited them, the group steeled themselves and headed to the Parm byroad. As they reached the gate, Agate joined back up with them and they proceeded up the mountain. On the way, he explained to them the truth of the Hamel tragedy. 14 years ago, Jaeger dropouts had been hired to attack the village. In the process, it was destroyed and most of the villagers were killed. Masterminds behind it were a group of noble officers and the Imperial Army looking to trigger a war with Liberl to make a name for themselves, 100 Days War. When the truth of the incident was uncovered, the Empire signed a ceasefire with Liberl on the condition they never make public what had happened. Hamel's name was quietly wiped off the map, the road sealed up, and the truth became that a landslide had occurred in the area. Upon arriving at the ruins, Reen and the others laid flowers in remembrance of the fallen villagers. To their surprise, they encountered Shirley and Duvally, who were there to pay their own respects. Despite this, the two groups ended up facing off against each other. With Agate's help, Reen and the others were able to overcome the various beasts and archaisms the pair from Ouroboros summoned. However, they were joined by even more reinforcements. The other two members of the Stahlritter and the regimental commander of the Red Constellation. I don't think I've ever said that word. Just as it seemed like the battle was about to reignite, a Panzer Soldat suddenly charged out of nowhere, scattering the ranks of the Society's members. It was piloted by Ash from Class 8. Kurt, Yuna, and Altina leapt in as well. With their foes caught off guard, they pressed the attack. Kurt readied his twin blades for battle, having come to terms with his inexperience. He told Reen that he had finally found his own identity as a swordsman, and as a member of Class 7. And just then, however, a massive archaism appeared, swatting Ash's Soldat away with ease. It was an ion type Alpha? No, Gamma? I don't know, it was an ion. A successor to the one of the godlike machines that had appeared in Crossbell 2 years prior. That's gonna bug me, I actually don't know. Seeing it, Reen immediately raised his hand and called out to Valimar. He launched attack after attack at the Ion, but not even Valimar, Zemirian, or Tachi had any effect on its massive armor. Unable to sit by and watch any longer, Kurt helped a winded Ash out of the Panzer Soldat and took over, joining Reen in the fight. Together, they were able to knock the Ion off balance and hit it with a flurry of solid blows. Visibly damaged after their well-coordinated onslaught, it finally shut down. The members of Class 7 cheered for their victory. Their celebrations were interrupted, however, by the appearance of the mysterious figures who had been watching the battle unfold. Standing on a cliff above the fight were the members of Zephyr, Trapmaster Zeno, Leonidas the Behemoth, and his adoptive father, Rutger Clausel, the Jaeger King, who had died 3 years prior. After a brief conversation, Rutger leapt inside what appeared to be a purple Divine Knight and impaled the Ion, utterly destroying it. Both Jaeger Corps and the members of the Stahlritter then quickly withdrew, their jobs done. After the dust had cleared, Reen began scolding his students for going against orders, but praised them for their performance in such an unexpected situation. He also recognized Kurt's impressive display of skill and how far he'd come in developing his style in his own unique way. At last, the final day of their field exercises was upon them. Though still wary of what Ouroboros and Zephyr had planned, Reen and his old friends bid each other farewell for the time being, looking forward to their next meeting. With their tasks in Sutherland complete, the members of the branch campus boarded the Derflinger and prepared to return to Leaves. Oh, that was one chapter. Chapter 2. May had arrived, and spring was in full force in the town of Leaves. Between their clubs and schoolwork, the students found themselves busier than ever. One evening, Reen and his colleague Randolph ended up having dinner together at the local pub. There, they talked about Randolph's history in the SSS and the man Reen had faced in Crossbell the year before. While there had always been a bit of a wall between the two, they finally had a chance to break it down after a night of drinks together. The next day, the faculty had another briefing. This time around, however, it included a most unexpected guest. Cedric Rice Arner, Crown Prince of the Empire, and a first-year student at Thor's main campus. He had come on behalf of the Imperial Army to inform the instructors about their next set of field exercises. They were to travel to a recently annexed territory on the Empire's easternmost edge, the Crossbell province. While there, they would assist with security for an inspection team that would be visiting the provincial capital of Crossbell City. After the meeting concluded, Cedric requested Reen meet him on the roof. There, he thanked Reen for rescuing him at the Infernal Castle and expressed regret for his own powerlessness, saying he wished he had been stronger back then. To Reen's surprise, Cedric then asked him to transfer to the main campus, telling him it would be far more suitable for the place for the Ashen Chevalier than a pale reflection that was the branch campus. He then dismissively suggested that Kurt, who had been listening in with Yuna and Altina, could transfer as well, even going so far as to tell Kurt that he could have him reinstated as his guard. After hearing such disdain in Cedric's voice, Reen and Kurt were shocked to see how much he had changed. Reen refused Cedric's offer, but the prince promised to return. And the very next day, he made good on that promise. In the middle of the branch campus's Panzer Soldat training, Cedric and two other students from the main campus suddenly arrived with soldats of their own, for a bit of a friendly competition. They issued a challenge to Class 7 for a mock battle. Kurt and Yuna boarded their mechs, with Ash from Class 8 joining them. After a difficult battle, the branch campus team emerged victorious, yet Cedric had achieved what he set out to do: demonstrate how much stronger he had gotten since the Infernal Castle. As he turned and left the branch campus, Principal Aurelia and Musei of Class 9 spoke in hushed tones about the prince's future. A few days later, and the branch campus was preparing to depart for their second set of field exercises. For Yuna, it would be a trip back to her hometown, wearing a uniform from the empire that annexed it. For Rain, it would be returning to a country whose independence he helped take away. They boarded the train and departed Leaves, filled with apprehension over what lay ahead for each of them. The following morning, they arrived at their field exercise camp on the outskirts of Crossbell City. As in Sutherland, Class 7's first task was to report their arrival to the person overseeing the region. Thus, they headed for Orcus Tower to meet with Crossbell's first Governor General, Rufus Alberea. It was from him they received their assignments. Similarly to before, they received a crucial investigation report among their list of requests. It detailed information regarding the appearance of cryptids in the region. Yuna was eager to get started, thrilled to be helping her hometown out in place of the SSS. As Reen and his students arrived back on the ground floor of the tower, they ran into someone unexpected. Machias Regnitz from the old Class 7 greeted them. He explained he was there on business for his job at the Government Accountability Inspectorate. After leaving Orcus Tower, the students finished their patrols of the city and met up with Teal Plato, the new chief of the Epstein Foundation's Crossbell branch. I think it might be Epstein. She requested the branch campus accompany her through the tunnel beneath the city known as the Geofront. A control terminal had malfunctioned there, and she needed to repair it. Together, they made their way below the city to the Geofront's F sector. After fighting their way through the tunnels and arriving at the terminal, Tio began to get to work. Before she could, however, the air began to tremble and a magic knight suddenly appeared before them. Reen and the others fought desperately to protect the terminal, eventually emerging victorious. But before they could determine why an Erebonian creation like a magic knight had appeared in Crossbell, another manifested right before their eyes. Exhausted from their battle, the five of them could barely move, much less fight. Just when all hope was lost, an arrow of light cut through the air. Above them stood a blonde-haired woman with an orbital bow. She was Elisa Reinford, another member of the original Class 7. At her side stood her family's aide, Sharon Kruger. The two struck the Magic Knight hard, obliterating it with ease. In celebration, Elisa embraced Reen, the long-awaited reunion bringing tears to her eyes. After repairs to the terminal had been completed, the group returned to the field exercise camp. They decided to begin their cryptid investigation next and headed to the shores of Lake Elm, with Sharon coming along to help. There, they found a patch of scarlet pleroma grass, glowing faintly. The group surmised it must be related to the blue pleroma grass that had appeared alongside the cryptids 2 years ago. As they were pondering the grass's sudden reappearance, they felt a shift in the air, and a giant cryptid manifested behind them and attacked. Thanks to Sharon's invaluable assistance in battle, however, they were able to defeat it. Making sure the area was clear of any other threats, they gathered a sample of the pleroma grass and headed back to camp. On the way back, Sharon revealed more about her past to Reen. Nearly 10 years ago, she had been dispatched to Ruhr on a mission for Ouroboros. She failed, and it had cost someone their life. That person was Franz Reinford, Elise's father. After they made it back to camp, they were given their next objective: investigate the connection between the Pleroma grass, the Magic Knights, and the cryptids. The group's meeting ended with the sound of an airship flying overhead. The Pantagruel had arrived in Crossbell, bearing the members of the inspection team. As the massive airship reached Orca's tower, its passengers disembarked. Governor Regnitz, Chairman Arena, Elise Schwarzer, Princess Elfin, and Prince Oliver's arrival was televised to the whole province. After watching the event on the Dareflinger's monitors, Class 7 set out to resume their special ops missions. They began by searching for more scarlet Pleroma grass off the main highway. As they were searching, they suddenly heard a young boy's voice call out to them in a mocking tone. As he did, a giant cryptid appeared, cornering them. Reen immediately knew it was a threat he needed Valmar's help for, and moved to summon his Divine Knight. Anticipating this, the mysterious boy erected a barrier, severing Reen's connection to Valmar and preventing him from being summoned. With no options left to him, Reen unleashed his power, allowing the group to just barely triumph over the massive creature. And as he had feared, though, Reen lost control of his power again. He fell to his knees, clutching at his chest. Intrigued by this turn of events, the boy attempted to summon another cryptid, but to his surprise, vines of golden ivy wrapped around the barrier he had created, shattering it. The group turned to look upwards at a nearby cliff. Their savior this time was Emma, yet another member of the original Class 7. Her black cat familiar, Celine, hurried to Reen's side and quickly used her magic to stabilize his power. Disappointed that his fun was now over, the boy let out a sinister laugh and teleported away. Their investigation complete for the moment, they headed back to the city with Emma. On the way back, she explained she had further studied magic under her grandmother after graduation, and that she was now searching for her sister Vida. As Reen and the others enjoyed a lively conversation about the old Class 7, something in the distance caught their eye. 4 Dragonov-class railway cannons, manufactured by the Reinford Group, were being transported along the train tracks. Watching with worried expressions, the group determined the massive weapons of war were headed for the eastern border. Upon arriving in the city, they dropped Emma off and bid her farewell for the time being. Shortly thereafter, they received a call from Toa. The branch campus had received another request from the Governor General. They were to assist with security for a party at Orca's Tower that evening. The staff and students of the branch campus met up and made their way to the tower as instructed. There, Rufus had arranged rooms for Reen, new Class 7, and Tita Russell of Class 9 to meet with the guest of honor. After speaking with Governor Regnitz, Irina Reinford, Prince Olivert, Princess Elfin, and Elise, they began to return to the waiting area. However, on the way, Rufus stopped Reen and asked if he could speak with him privately. They spoke about Reen's birth father, Osborne, and Rufus told the story of how he met the Chancellor and became the primary member of the Ironbloods. Discovering that his adoptive father, Baron Schwarzer, had a hand in the events left Reen with mixed feelings. Later, the dinner party began winding down, and the branch campus soon stood by until the inspection team was ready to leave. Overhearing Alphen and Elise talking to Muse, Reen learned that she had transferred to the branch campus from St. Estrella under unusual circumstances. Heading back to where the rest of the students were waiting, Reen was shocked when he sensed a familiar presence. Moments after, a deep rumbling shook the tower. The security room's terminal showed footage of the roof, where the Pantagruel's landing craft had been engulfed in flame. Two of Ouroboros' enforcers stood beside it. Seeing this, Reen rushed to the roof. New Class 7, along with Ash and Muse, chased after him, ignoring their instructor's orders to wait. Along the way, Reen met up with Sharon, and the two quickly made their way up to the tower together. Awaiting them at the top was McBurn, and with him, the mysterious boy Reen had encountered earlier, Campanella. Yuna and the others students arrived not long after, having fought their way through the swarms of archaisms that had invaded the tower. McBurn taunted Reen, hoping to provoke him into unleashing his power. Meanwhile, Campanella battled the students, barraging them with powerful arts. Driven into a corner, it seemed like Reen had no other choice. Just as he was prepared to call on his power, a voice called out, and a trio of teleportation circles appeared. Emma, Machias, and Elisa arrived in the nick of time to help. Machias and Elisa went to assist the others, while Emma used her magic to dispel the flames. The prospect of more opponents only made McBurn more excited. He was prepared for another fight, until Prince Oliver, the Governor General, and the rest of the branch campus arrived. Some questioning by the prince prompted the enforcers to reveal they were in the area to find Vita, who had left Ouroboros after a disagreement with the other Anguis. The conversation then moved to Ouroboros' experiments. In response, Campanella gave a signal and a shadow appeared overhead. It was the ion-type Beta 2. It spread its wings wide, creating an ominous silhouette, and crushed the landing craft in a show of power. McBurn and Campanella then started to make their exit, but they were stopped by Yuna. She told them the SSS wouldn't allow them to get away with their plans. The dark grin, Campanella turned to Rufus and revealed what the Governor General had been keeping from the branch campus. Specifically, that the members of the SSS had been captured and trapped in Michelin to prevent them from taking action. Rather than acting overtly against the heroes of Crossbell, the Imperial government intended to make them fade into obscurity. With that, the enforcers took their leave, as the Ion flew off into the night. Everyone stood there, still reeling from the shocking turn of events, as Yuna slowly walked up to Reen. She shook him, anguishing over what his country has done to her heroes. Finally, breaking down, she cried out for the return of the free city she loved. The next morning, Major Lecter showed up at the field's exercise camp, just as he had done in Sutherland. He had with him another Imperial order for Reen. It read, "Uncover the goals of the Society and restore order to Crossbell." Leaving Kurt and Altina to take care of the despondent Yuna, Reen and his old classmates departed to carry out their mission. They had two pieces of information to go on, the ions themselves and the nature of Ouroboros' experiments. Believing these to be the key to finding the hiding enforcers, the group searched for a place dense with mana that could be used to power Ouroboros' massive machines. With some help from Emma, Tio, and the terminal in the Geofront, they managed to pinpoint a location. The spot they would most likely find their target was an old rune created by ancient alchemists, Stargazer's Tower. Back in the Derflinger, Yuna told Kurt and Altina about what happened to her during Crossbell's annexation. The transport she was in had been attacked by Calvardian forces, and she felt completely powerless as she desperately tried to protect her siblings. That was when they were saved by the Ashen Chevalier, Reen Schwarzer. Her frustration over her helplessness and inability to do anything was why she had felt such hostility towards Reen the whole time. Meanwhile, in the city, Reen and the others were joined by a traveling bard by the name of Olivier Lenheim. In truth, it was an old disguise of Prince Oliver's. He had donned once more. As a member of the Imperial family, he felt he needed to do something about the situation personally. Together, they made their way to Stargazer's tower and fought through its monster-infested halls to get to the rooftop. There, they found Campanella and McBurn waiting, just as they expected. Prepared for this encounter, Emma called upon her spells to quell McBurn's flames. Reen attempted to call Valimar, but Campanella raised another barrier, preventing him from reaching his divine knight. Just as things began to look dire, the two enforcers were barraged by a spray of gunfire. Yuna, Kurt, and Muse had come to help. They caught their opponents off guard, allowing Altina and Ash to flank them with another surprise attack. A Panzer Soldat equipped with a booster flew in, shattering Campanella's barrier, and allowing Reen to summon Valimar. Yuna climbed aboard the Soldat, confronting the looming Ion together with Reen. Fending off their airborne foe, the two delivered a relentless series of strikes to it, eventually damaging its orbital energy converters and knocking it out of the sky. The members of Class 7 rejoiced, but their happiness was short-lived as McBurn called out to the three mysterious figures that had been watching. The first was a projection of Vita, who had been observing the situation from afar. The other two were a masked man, who introduced himself as Azure Siegfried, and a floating black sphere that accompanied him. He explained that he had come in lieu of the chief of the gnomes, but revealed little else. Their experiments completed, McBurn proceeded to use his flame to reduce the damaged ion to melt its scrap. As the two members of Ouroboros took their leave, Campanella announced that their plot to reclaim the phantasmal Blaze Plan had begun. Ordered by a voice from the Black Sphere, the masked man retreated, boarding a Mac that looked like the Asher Knight. Members of the old Class 7 looked on, stunned as it flew away. The final one to vanish, Vita's parting words left a lasting impression on those gathered on the rooftop. The story had already begun, the fairy tale that tells of the end of Erebonia, Crossbell, the entire world. Shortly thereafter, the rest of the branch campus arrived and helped clear out the remaining archaisms in the tower. The members of the old Class 7 discussed the masked man, agreeing there was no way he could be the person they thought he was. Reen turned to Yuna and acknowledged her hard work. She had fought well, and shown him the true pride of Crossbell. Surprised to hear such praise, Yuna didn't know what to say at first, but responded with an enthusiastic smile. The next day, saw the Derflinger ready to depart. The various friends and allies of the branch campus gathered to bid them farewell. Celine decided to join them on their trip back to Leaves in order to help Reen control his power. Machias, Elisa, and Emma vowed to do whatever they could to fulfill the promise Class 7 had made to each other when they graduated. As the students and staff talked with each other on their trip back home, the train was filled with a sense of accomplishment and hope. Gasping, Toa pointed outside. In a nearby cliff, three allies of Crossbell's Special Support Section had come to see the branch campus off, as thanks for helping their home. As they passed by, the young man in the middle stuck out his fist in a wordless gesture of support to Reen. And from the train, Reen mirrored it, wishing him luck in the future as well. Whew. Chapter 3. This is a long video. June came, filled with light showers and the early signs of summer. The students of Class 7 were surprised to find they had two new members. Ash and Muse had transferred from their respective classes into special operations. Oh yeah, Chapter 3. I didn't even say it. The transfer was Principal Aurelia's decision. awaited both discipline the two especially unruly students and shore up the numbers in the school's smallest class. During one of their free days, Rain was pleasantly surprised to have two familiar faces show up in leaves. His sister Elise, who had come to deliver some letters, and George, one of Reen's upperclassmen from the main campus. While catching up with George, Reen learned more about the gnomes and deduced the name they now went by, the Black Workshop. Under that name, the gnomes helped Chancellor Osborne steal the Phantasmal Blaze plan from Ouroboros during the Civil War. However, they were still shrouded in mystery, so much so that Reen and the others were unable to infer much else about them. Later that evening, Reen returned to his room and read the letters that Elise had delivered. The first was from Reen's swordsmanship teacher, Master Kafai, who had written some inspirational words to his final student. The other one was from Teo, Reen's adoptive father. He wrote to explain the shared past between himself and Reen's biological father, Osborne. The next day, New Class 7 went through their usual trials in Einhell Keep with their new roster. Reen was pleased to see his students working well together. During the briefing afterward, it was announced that their next field exercises would take place in the Lemaire province. They would cover 2 cities and the Juno Naval Fortress. Before they knew it, their departure date had arrived, and the branch campus was on their way to Lemaire. As soon as they reached their camp, Class 7 departed for the Naval Fortress to meet up with the local leadership. There, they spoke with Wallace Bardius, the head of the Unified Regions Army. Known as the Black Whirlwind, he had served as Aurelia's right-hand man during both the Civil War and the Northern War, and he was renowned for his spearmanship. Class 7 started their field exercises on the outskirts of Ordiz, taking care of requests along the way. As they were investigating, they confronted a group of mysterious Jaegers, but their foe had backup, and Class 7 soon found themselves surrounded. It was in that moment that Eustace and Milliam of the old Class 7 rode in to their rescue, driving back the Jaegers. The two both happened to be in orders at the same time, Eustace for the Imperial Provincial Council, and Milliam for an Intelligence Division mission. Reen and his students thanked their saviors and departed, heading to Raquel to further investigate the Jaeger Corps' movements. After completing their business in Raquel, they left to investigate Rock Patio to the south. There, they witnessed the purple Jaegers that they had come across before in the midst of a battle with another Jaeger Corps, known as Nidhogg. As the purple Jaegers withdrew, the Nidhogg squad turned their focus on Class 7. Outnumbered and surrounded again, Reen was prepared to call Valimar to even the odds. Wouldn't you know it? To his surprise, however, they were rescued by a timely intervention from Sarah, the old Class 7's homeroom instructor, and Angelica, another of Reen's upperclassmen. Thanks to their ambush, the Jaegers quickly withdrew. Since Reen's graduation, Sarah had returned to her duties as a bracer and had recently been tracking suspicious Jaeger movements. Angelica, meanwhile, explained that she had come to Ordis to participate in the Imperial Provincial Council as a representative of House Ragnar. That evening, Reen returned to Raquel with Sarah and Angelica to gather more info on the 2 Jaeger groups. There, they happened to meet with Claire, and together they were able to determine all of the various Jaeger movements at play in Lemaire. It turned out Nidhogg and the mysterious purple Jaegers weren't the only corps active in the area. The Red Constellation, who had connections with Ouroboros, and Zephyr, hired by an unknown party, were all there. Further, As a result of their info gathering, they were able to determine that the Purple Jaegers were the remnants of the Northern Jaegers. They were all citizens of North Ambria, which had been annexed by Erebonia in the Northern War. The next day, and Class 7 continued with their special ops missions. In the middle of their requests, Reen received a call from Eustace. He told them that Milliam had left to chase a lead the previous night and still hadn't returned. Despite a number of attempts to contact her, she couldn't be reached. Reen and his students began asking around about Milliam's whereabouts and discovered that she had set out for Brionia Island. They rented a small boat and headed to the island, hoping to pick up her trail. There they were struck by various runes that dotted the island. Thanks to the pendant Emma gave Reen, they were able to open the way and the Soul Shrine revealed itself before them. Reen preemptively called Valimar to the island, just to be safe, and then he and Class 7 ventured into the shrine. As they descended into its depths, they found the Stahlritter and another Ion there waiting for them. Milliam was there with them, as their captive. Class 7 confronted the three knights, but after their battle, the Stahlritter initiated their Radiant Star formation, powering themselves up significantly. Just as they were prepared to strike, a knight clad in silvery armor suddenly appeared. She was Ouroboros' seventh Anguis, Arianrod, the Steel Maiden. Her very presence was enough to push Reen to immediately call Valimar down to them. Unfortunately, before he could board his Divine Knight, the Ion powered on and pinned Valimar in place. His other options exhausted, Reen had no choice but to call upon his power. With his full strength unleashed, he and Arianrod faced off one-on-one. Reen gave the battle his all, but it wasn't long before his power began to run loose. He let out a cry as he slumped down. The students rushed forward to defend him, and in response, Arianrod held her lance skyward, preparing to bring it crashing down on them. Before she could, however, a hawk swooped in down on at the knights, startling them. Amid the confusion, a tall young man leapt over Class 7, landing between the two groups. He was Gaius Warzel, the last member of the old Class 7 to make an appearance. With lance in hand, he calmly faced the Stahlritter and their leader. Sensing there was something different about Gaius, Arianrod called for her knights and the Ion to retreat. Before he and the others could celebrate their victory, Reen turned and called out to someone, a person who had been watching their fight the whole time. Siegfried emerged from the shadows, however he refused to answer any of Reen's questions, instead calling up the teleportation circle and vanishing. Though they were left with many questions, the group was glad that Milliam was safe, and that they had met up with Gaius. Their task complete, they returned to Ortis. On the third day of the field exercises, the quiet of dawn was broken by a thundering sound of cannon fire. As the instructors quickly gave orders to the panicking students, Lecter made an urgent visit to let them know what had happened. With Ouroboros' assistance, the Northern Jaegers had stolen 4 railway cannons and were firing on Ortis. Lecter then presented Reen with his orders to resolve the situation. Due to the possibility of an Ion reappearing, Reen told the new Class 7 to remain on standby at the camp. He then joined with Gaius and the others, and together they headed to where the cannons had been moved. After fighting their way through the multiple Northern Jaeger squads, they arrived at the cannons, only to be confronted by Shirley and a company of Jaegers from the Red Constellation. McBurn and Campanella were there as well. Fortunately, Agate, Toval, and Brigadier General Bardius arrived to help, as did the members of the Branch Campus's Combat Tactics class. Realizing that it was all a diversion and that the Northern Jaeger's true target was Juneau Naval Fortress, Reen's group quickly made their way there by bike. They were joined by the new Class 7, but the fortress had already fallen. Its banners had been changed, and Aryan Road stood atop it, the Ion looming above. To make things worse, Reen's group was stopped at the door by Zephyr and Azure Siegfried. They claimed they were there to fight Ouroboros and wouldn't let anyone else take their prey. It was then that Principal Aurelia arrived and convinced Rutger that his fight belonged to her. This fight. Leaving things to her and Reen's group, the Jaeger King stepped aside. From there, Reen and his allies split into two groups in order to properly navigate their way through the fortress. As they worked together to unlock the path for each other and climb to the top, they fought off the numerous archaisms that filled the fortress's halls. The main group, led by Reen, was the first to arrive at the roof. A thick fog settled over the area as Aryan Road removed her helmet and readied her lance. Aurelia smiled, her excitement at the prospect of the impending battle rising. Electricity could be felt in the air as their battle began. The Stahl Ritter relentlessly rained blow after blow down upon them, but Aurelia and Class 7 responded for each strike. As the battle met its end, both sides fell to their knees in exhaustion. Even Aurelia was winded. Even so, she had proven herself against the Steel Maiden in combat. Her role in the fight complete, she sheathed her sword. The only battle remaining was for Reen, a clash between Divine Knight and Ion. Reen summoned Valimar, and Ash and Musei joined in their Panzer Soldats. During the battle, the Ion used its ability to manipulate space to break Valimar's Tachi. As if in response, everyone's Arcuses began to glow. Reen was then able to channel the power of his bonds with everyone into a broken Tachi that would temporarily restore the blade and defeat the Ion. After the battle, Reen and the others questioned the defeated knights about Ouroboros' experiments and what their ultimate goal was. Rather than answering, Aryan Road simply raised her hand and called a name. Gregrion? Was that misspelled, or... I don't remember it being called that. Maybe I'm wrong. A giant silver figure appeared before them, obscured by the mist. It brandished its colossal lance and pierced the defeated Ion through, utterly destroying it. Each experiment has borne fruit. We must reach a decision before much longer. With those parting words, Aryan Road vanished with Argreon? Argreon, yeah, I think that is right. Followed by her three knights. Brigadier General Bardius returned to the fortress after resolving things in the canyon, and under his command, the chaotic situation was quickly brought under control. That evening, the Imperial Provincial Council held a meeting. Under Eustace and Aurelia's watchful eyes, the nobles present began voting on who would be the successor to the title of Duke Cayenne. It was decided that it would be the former Duke's niece, Lady Mildine Uselith de Cayenne. The green-haired young woman then led the council in discussing issues regarding the government. The next day, Reen and his students bid their farewells to the friends and allies who had come to see them off. They discussed Aryan Road's Divine Knight and her parting words, agreeing that now, more than ever, they needed to prepare for what lay ahead. Looking forward to the day when Old Class 7 could finally fulfill their promise to each other, Reen stepped aboard the train and departed Lemare. Chapter 4. Oh my god. July arrived, and brought with it a sweltering heat. During one of their free days, Rien dropped by the keep, where he had an interesting conversation with Professor Schmidt. He told Rien about a man named Franz Reinford, who had died in an explosion 10 years prior. Not only was Franz the professor's first disciple, he was the inventor of the Panzersoldats and Elisa's father. Later that day, the branch campus was informed their next field exercises would take place in Heimdall, which was preparing it for its summer festival. This time around, there had been no word of movements from Ouroboros or any Jaeger Corps, but there were rumors of another threat. The branch campus was to assist with local security, and this time they wouldn't be alone. The main campus would be there too. That evening, Rien spoke to his friends in the old Class 7 about his field exercises. They all agreed the chance for their long-awaited reunion had finally arrived. The next day, the students had another session of Panzersoldat training. Rien and Randy introduced them to the Goliath, a giant model of Panzersoldat. Most of the students had a hard time controlling the behemoth, but Altina seemed to be take to it better than the others. A mock battle was arranged, pitting Altina against the other members of Class 7. Though she was a formidable opponent, her classmates proved the victors. However, Altina didn't exit her mech afterward, and gave no response when the others called for her. As they tried to reach her, the Goliath began emitting a strange sound and sprang to life once more. Yuna and the others were blown back by its unexpected attack. Rien summoned Valimar and had him scan the berserk mech. According to him, Altina appeared to be in a trance, unconsciously piloting the colossal soldat. Rien deftly evaded her attacks and delivered a clean blow to its cockpit, snapping Altina out of whatever had come over her. With that, the Goliath stopped its attack and powered down. Meanwhile, high above the training ground, a floating black sphere witnessed everything unfold. A dispassionate clinical voice concluded the conditions were met to advance to the final sequence before the sphere vanished. As they departed for their field exercises a few days later, Class 7 sensed the danger looming ahead, but resolved to confront it together. Surprised to find that Principal Aurelia and Professor Schmidt would be joining them this time, the students and faculty boarded the train and departed for Heimdall. In order to meet with the local representatives as usual, Class 7 headed to Heimdall Central Station. Once there, they entered the Railway Military Police's headquarters and reported to Governor Regnitz. They weren't the only ones this time, however. Prince Cedric and the main campus's Class 1 were there to report in as well. After receiving the request, Rien noticed a form among them labeled Top Priority Mission. Investigate and capture the members of Hercules, a special task force from Calvard, currently hiding out in Heimdall, it read. Hearing the details of their mission made the students a bit uneasy, but as they were going over things, the meeting room door opened and a surprising guest made his entrance. It was the Blood and Iron Chancellor himself, Gileath Osborne. He greeted the room before turning his attention to Rien. The two exchanged a brief greeting, the tension in the air palpable. The reason the Chancellor had come was to announce to the students that they had been invited to a party at Valflame Palace the day after tomorrow. Though Class 1 was thrilled by the news, Class 7 found themselves wary of the sudden invitation. As Ash watched Osborne leave, he suddenly winced in pain, covering his left eye. After the meeting, Class 1 issued a mocking challenge before departing, and Class 7 headed to their assigned areas. As they made their patrols and searched for clues regarding the whereabouts of the Hercules members, they ran into someone on the outskirts of the city. That someone it was Thomas Lysander, the former history teacher at Thor's main campus. Rean knew him by his true moniker, Lysander the Partitioner, second among the Dominion. He was a high-ranking member of the church and had been pursuing the truth behind the Black Records. Class 7 visited the Heimdall racecourse next. The manager had requested their help investigating the strange noises coming from beneath the track. They descended underground to explore the tunnels beneath the city, and there they found several patches of scarlet pleroma grass. No sooner had they found them, though, than a magic knight suddenly appeared before them. They dispatched it and then destroyed all the nearby pleroma grass they could find. As they were leaving the tunnels, they heard the sound of heavy boots echoing through the corridors. They belonged to members of the Hercules Squad. The agents had been using the tunnels to move about the city unseen. Class 7 took the opportunity to quickly surround them, weapons drawn. Their foe seemed unconcerned, however. And for good reason. As soon as they were able, they made use of their state-of-the-art battle ordnance to easily slip through the group's fingers, running deeper into the tunnels. Class 7 quickly gave chase, but lost the agent's trail after hitting a sudden dead end. As they stood there, unsure how to continue, the mysterious blonde girl appeared once more. This time, Rean wasn't the only one who could see her. With her help, they were able to follow the agents through the secret passageways and continue their pursuit. Chasing their target back up to the surface, they found themselves in Himmel Cemetery. Awaiting them there were the smug faces of Class 1, and having just apprehended the agents that they had been chasing. The whole situation had gone according to Lecter's meticulously calculated plan. After Class 1 left with the agents, Rean brought Class 7 to one of the graves there at the cemetery. It belonged to Crow Armbrust, the final member of the old Class 7. He had lost his life at the Infernal Castle during the war. After paying their respects, they turned to leave, but Yuna noticed something shining on the ground. It was a decorative brooch engraved with House Ragnar's crest, Angelica's brooch. Ash then pointed out that the area surrounding Crow's grave looked like it had been recently disturbed. Rean contacted the branch campus, and upon returning to the grave to exhume Crow's body, they discovered it was empty, despite Rean and Toa having seen Crow buried there. The group was at a loss, until Aurelia brought up that the possibility that the body they'd seen at the funeral was simply a replica. Meanwhile, the clock was ticking for the branch campus. Class 7 received an order to capture the rest of the Calvardian agents by the end of the next day. Despite all the worrying things on his mind, Rean was determined to keep his promise to his classmates. That evening, he took a bike from camp and headed into the city. Rean arrived at the place they'd agreed to meet and found all of his former classmates waiting inside. Together, they celebrated their first full reunion in over a year and had a lively conversation as they enjoyed food Sharon had prepared for them. As things started to wind down, the main topic of discussion came up, the task they had promised to do when they met up once more. Identify the path Erebonia is headed down and determine how Class 7 will act. Talking things over, they determined that Erebonia could only be headed in one direction, an all-out invasion of the Calvard Republic. They had seen the swiftly increasing number of railway cannons and the rapid expansion of the military firsthand. Further, they knew that behind the scenes, the Black Workshop was working under the Chancellor to plan something related to the Empire's dark past. As the state of the world came into clearer focus, the old Class 7 knew that the situation had become more dire than they had feared. They knew that they had to stop the war looming on the horizon. and at the same time, discover what was happening behind the scenes and prevent whatever calamity was brewing there. Everyone there agreed, resolved to do their part. The second day of field exercises dawned, and the remaining Calvardian agents had become more cautious, with the majority of them hiding underground. Principal Aurelia and Randy each led a team of students into the tunnels to conduct sweeps. Meanwhile, Class 7 returned to patrolling the city, hoping to discover any new clues. Later in the day, they received word from the other two teams. They reported they had found the agents, but something was wrong. The agents had acted, strangely, exhibiting monstrous strength and then disappearing into thin air. Rain then called Emma, who identified the agents as having become night-touched. She also told them she discovered the spirit veins below the city converged at the Imperial Museum. As Reiner and his students arrived there, they found one of the exhibits glowing with a strange light, and they were told a similar light had flooded the museum's basement. Heading into the tunnels below to investigate, they found that the area had been warped by an ominous miasma that filled the air. An otherworldly gate stood before them. A group of agents emerged from the gate, their movements stiff and their behavior strange. The mysterious girl then reappeared, subduing the agents with special talismans. It was then that Class 7 finally learned her identity, Crimson Roselia, the elder of the Hexen clan. She told them the Dark Dragon of Legend had begun to restore itself and was the cause of the agent's transformation into Night-Touched. Mentioning she had her own mission to see to, she ran ahead into the imposing gate. Wait. Rain's classmates arrived shortly thereafter, and together, the united Class 7 entered the gate to help save Heimdall from certain disaster. After winding their way through the dragon's lair, they finally found themselves in its center, along with the Dark Dragon itself. The beast let loose a powerful roar, and a fierce battle commenced. When there was an opening in the battle, Reen took it to call Valimar and slay their foe. Wielding his Zemurian Tachi, he unleashed a fierce assault, pushing the dragon back. It let out an unearthly roar as it was defeated, and began spewing pitch-black miasma. Seeing this, Roselia cast a spell, and the Dark Dragon disappeared, bathed in a soft white light. Class 7 then found themselves back in the underground tunnel, with no trace of the I can never say it, Pleroma grass, the Dark Dragon's lair, or the ominous miasma. Having successfully saved the day, they breathed a sigh of relief. It was then, however, that Azure Siegfried appeared before them once more. A mysterious figure readied his dual guns, looking for a challenge. Rain stepped forward to represent Class 7. In order to prove something they had all long suspected, he would battle Siegfried one-on-one. After a heated battle, the two reached a stalemate. Frustrated, Ring confronted Siegfried about his true identity, Crow Armbrust. However, it only served to agitate the masked man, and he promptly summoned the Azure Knight and teleported away. On the third day of the field exercises, a ceremony was held at the racecourse to recognize the students who had helped to capture the Calvardian agents. Though the events of the Dark Dragon's lair were not made public, Prince Olivert offered his thanks to the members of Class 7 as well. Students were then given the rest of the day and to enjoy the start of the Heimdall's summer festival and take in the festivities. Before Reen could plunge headlong into celebration, however, General Craig summoned him for a meeting. There, he told Reen what he knew of Osborne's past and the truth behind Reen's birth mother. 14 years ago, Osborne was a brigadier general in the army and lived happily with his wife and child. That is, until a noble-born officer, who had long resented Osborne for his success, arranged an attack on his home. In the aftermath, only the body of his wife was found. Osborne and his 5-year-old son had vanished. 3 months later, Osborne abruptly returned and swiftly brought the 100 Days War to a close. In honor of his feat, he was appointed as Chancellor. But what had happened during those 3 months he was missing? General Craig told Reen that, as Osborne's son, he was the only one who could discover the truth. Heavy thoughts still weighed on his mind. Weighing on his mind, Reen nevertheless enjoyed the festival before joining Toa in Class 7 at the Imperial Palace. There, they spoke with Empress Priscilla, Princess Alphen, and a multitude of other guests they were acquainted with. At one point, Claire notified Reen that someone wanted to speak with him, leading him deeper into the palace, to a meeting room. Waiting for him there was none other than the Emperor of Erebonia, Eugent III. With a grave expression, he told Reen of the curse that had tainted their nation from its very inception. The people of Erebonia, he explained, were honorable and strong, yet history was full of their violent acts of folly. Sometimes they would almost act as though possessed. He also told Reen that the Imperial family was in possession of the true set of the Black Records, which detailed the events of the past and the future awaiting them. If he had tried to steer the country away from its tragic acts, the force that distorts the minds of its people, the curse, would have only warped and twisted its fate further. This, the Emperor told Reen, was why he had done nothing to hinder Chancellor Osborne's plans. As their meeting concluded and Reen left the room, he was stopped by Osborne himself. The Chancellor told Reen that he sensed there was something he'd like to discuss, and the two headed to another room. There, Osborne told Reen the truth of their shared history. 14 years ago, when Osborne brought Reen to Amir, he destroyed all evidence he had a son, and of his past connection to Aaron Schwarzer. As a revolutionary taking on the 4 great houses, Osborne explained he couldn't have anything hold him back. He then went on to explain the details of Ouroboros' phantasmal blaze plan. They had used the false phantasm and crossbell to awaken the sleeping blaze in Erebonia, one of the legendary Septarian. Super vague. Just saying. However, Erebonia housed not one, but 2 of these sacred treasures. A clash between them, thousands of years ago, gave birth to the Great One. All of Erebonia was entangled in its blessing and its curse. As Osborne began to leave, Reen stopped him, asking for an explanation on why Crow's shot didn't kill him, and if it was connected to the scar on his chest. Osborne stopped and with a small smile began to explain. During the attack on their home 14 years ago, Reen's heart had been pierced by a shard of debris. In order to save him, Osborne had given Reen his own heart. The Chancellor then left without explaining further, saying he would leave Reen to figure out the rest on his own. His mind spinning with questions, Reen returned to the party to find that Ash was missing. After hearing that, Lecter's face went pale. He, Claire, and Milliam hurried to the room where Reen had met with the Emperor. Reen and Class 7 followed close behind. As they neared the room, a single gunshot rang out. They burst through the doors to find the Emperor lying on the ground, blood pouring from his chest. Osborne had the culprit pinned to the ground. It was Ash. He was unconscious, and a malicious black miasma was seeping from his body. Rufus inspected the small firearm Ash had used and calmly declared it was of Vern Company make. It was a gun from the Calvard Republic. Final chapter. The following day saw the capital shrouded in a dark cloud. All radios were tuned in to report the report on the Emperor's health, and a special edition of the paper was being distributed. Martial law had been declared, and the students were forced to stand by at their camp. The only one not there was Altina, having received orders from the intelligence division. Thinking about Altina's resolve to gather intel for Ash's sake, Rin and the other students rallied themselves together. Before long, the government issued a grave statement to the nation. Chancellor Osborne declared that the infiltration of Heimdall by Calvardian agents and the attempted assassination of the Emperor was no less than a declaration of war. He then announced the enactment of the National Mobilization Law, which was designed to bring every citizen of the Empire together to prepare for war. Were they simply using Ash as a convenient scapegoat, or had he been their unknowing pawn all along? Either way, it seemed the wheels had been set in motion, but to what ends, no one could say. In order to gather all of Class 7 together, Emma and Celine made it so Rin and the others could travel through the spirit veins. It was thanks to this that Rin and his students were able to sneak out of their camp and meet up with the old Class 7 in Himmel Cemetery. At Emma and Gaius' suggestion, they all headed to the Heimdall Cathedral. There, Thomas was waiting for them. He revealed his true title to all of them as the second Dominion of the Gralsritter. Further, Gaius introduced himself as the successor to the 8th Dominion, having inherited his master's stigma. Finally, the Crimson Witch Roselia showed herself. Together with Thomas, she explained in detail the story of what happened in Erebonia 1200 years ago. Back then, Erebonia housed two Septarian, Fire and Earth. Each had its own people that served it, but the two groups were at war. In their final clash, the two Septarian ended up fusing together. Their tremendous powers combined into a single being, and the Great One, the Septarian of Steel, was born. Knowing its power was more than mankind could handle, the Kins of Fire and Earth worked together to seal the Great One away. The Kin of Earth created 7 vessels, while the Kin of Fire split the Great One's power and infused each vessel with part of it. 7 figures in the form of knights, each bearing the Great One's power, the Divine Knights. As the centuries went by, the Kin of Fire became known as the Hexen Clan, the Kin of Earth, the Gnomes. Together, the two groups watched over Erebonia. Until 900 years ago, when the Dark Dragon appeared. In dealing with the crisis, the Gnomes lost their holy beast, the Witches their elder, and the alliance between the two groups had ended. Presumably, this was the point where the Gnomes became the Black Workshop and began their work to unleash the Great Twilight. All this was the fairy tale that tells of the end Vita had mentioned, and the current state of things was a telling sign it would soon be upon them. There were only 2 people who knew the truth, Chancellor Osborne and the Chief of the Gnomes, Black Ulbrich. As the group was puzzled over what had happened, Vita appeared and explained Ouroboros' plan. They had decided to work with the Chancellor and the Gnomes to bring about the Great Twilight, completing the Phantasmal Blaze plan amid the end of the world. A bell rang out in the distance, and Vita conjured up a vision of what was going on outside. They watched as pitch-black mana erupted from the ground below the Corel Imperial Villa, transforming it into a twisted, foreboding structure, the Graal of Erebos. Among the group of the Chancellor's followers and Ouroboros' members at the scene, they saw George, who had been missing for some time. Altina lying unconscious. I didn't understand the sentence for a second. And a white-haired man with red eyes, Black Ulbrich. But as soon as Elisa saw him, she recognized him as her father, Franz Reinfeld, who was thought to have died 10 years ago. As if summoned by the bell, the city was suddenly overrun by cryptids and magic knights that appeared out of thin air. Working together to fight off the enemies, the united Class 7 headed for the Grawl of Erebos. As they reached their destination, the Dareflinger arrived on the nearby tracks. The students and instructors of the branch campus disembarked, ready to help. Before them stood an army made up of the Stahlritter and 2 Jaeger Corps. George, now going by the name of Copper Georg, stood among them, facing his former friends. Combining their powers, Thomas and Roselia were able to open a small gap in the barrier that surrounded the Grawl. With their path in secured, Emma cast a spell, transporting her and the rest of Class 7 into the dark structure. They arrived at the top floor of the Grawl, ready to fight any that would stand in their way. Breen and the others descended down the spiral path. Along the way, they battled Anguis and enforcers of Ouroboros, allies of the Gnomes and the Chancellor's Ironbloods, Millium included. In order to allow Reen and his students to move on, the members of the old Class 7 stayed behind to occupy their opponents. Carrying their friends' hopes onward with them, Reen and the new Class 7 finally reached the bottom of the Grawl. There, they found Osborne, Alberic, Cedric, Altina, and, in the middle of the massive room, the sleeping figure of the Black Holy Beast. When asked about the Great Twilight, Alberic was more than willing to explain. The Great One's curse lingered all over Erebonia, altering the course of society and planting twisted seeds in the minds of its people. He and Ouroboros intended to use that curse to bring together the 7 pieces of the Great One and reforge them into a whole once more. In doing so, they could drown the world in conflict, the endless struggles leading humanity to ever greater heights. By slaughtering the Holy Beast with the proper tool, he explained, the curse would be released, and the Great Twilight would fall all over the land. This tool, a sword, required a being fully synchronized with a combat shell, one who was both human and weapon. A being which could sublimate into the Sword of the End in exchange for its own life, the final model of which was Altina Orion. The Holy Beast then awoke, blood-red eyes opening up all across its body, and let out a roar of pure rage. Reen summoned Valimar and his students Panzer Soldats, and together they fought back against the beast with all their might. The Holy Beast found an opening, however, and released a massive attack, blowing the students' mechs away. The only one left on the front lines, Reen brandished his sword, but the beast clamped down on it with its fearsome fangs. Then, as if to drive Reen further into a corner, a vision of the battle taking place outside the Grawl appeared before them. The Courageous had arrived on the scene, with Prince Olivert, Viscount Arcade, and Tolval on board. Alberic then pulled out a device, and with the press of a button, Class 7 watched in horror as the airship was rocked with explosions, sending its pieces plummeting to the earth. At that moment, the Holy Beast shattered the Tachi in its jaw and leapt at Valimar, biting down on the Divine Knight. Reen let out a pained scream from its cockpit as he felt the feedback from its attack. It was then that Altina suddenly woke up. She jumped on Clom Soleus and attacked the Holy Beast, freeing Reen from its grip. The beast was unfazed, however, and moved to strike at Altina, who was trying to protect Reen with her combat shell's barrier. At the last second, Millium rushed in and knocked Altina out of the way. Despite pleas for her to stop, she had Air Getlem put up a barrier in place of Altina's. "I'm gonna protect everyone." Millium made her final declaration before the enraged beast's claws struck. As Reen looked on, unable to stop the tragedy playing out before his eyes, time seemed to slow. The instant turned into an agonizing eternity. He was only able to react in time, and in enough time to have Valimar catch Millium and the destroyed pieces of Air Getlem in his arms as they fell. Millium smiled weakly as a pale light engulfed her, and she began to transform into an enormous glowing blade, the Originator Zero sword. Reen cried out in anguish and rage, his power consuming him. As it did, Valimar was overcome with its aura as well, changing to a sinister-looking form. Reen reached out for the sword and effortlessly lopped off the beast's arm and proceeded to chop away at it in a relentless blind fury. As he landed a final strike into its heart, the beast faded away, releasing a sinister wave of darkness that spread outward from the Grawl to every corner of the Empire. As Reen lost himself in an uncontrollable anger, Azure Siegfried's mask fell to the ground, revealing the face beneath. Having finally regained his memories, Crow descended to the lowest level of the Grawl. Rutger and Arianrode joined him, all three summoning their divine knights. The Azure Knight held Valimar back as the Palatinate and Argent Knights wrested the blade from its hands. Prince Cedric then boarded the Vermilion Knight, and finally, Osborne called out his own knight, Ishmelga, the Ebon Knight. As it held Valimar by the neck, Osborne made an ominous declaration. "Now, Reen, let us begin. Together we shall write the end to this wretched fairy tale, in ink, black as despair." And then we had to wait for well, only 8 months. Not bad. Something like that. Okay, that's it. We covered a lot of stuff. A little lot of breath. You know. This has been a long reading session. I took a break between each one, though. So, there are things they left out here. Big things that I noticed. Like, I was thinking of them in my head, and it kind of slowed me down sometimes. Just certain sections where they'd mention one thing, but they'd leave another thing out that I thought was important, but I guess overall it might not be essential. But yeah, this is definitely not a replacement for playing those games, so I wouldn't really consider it like that. But it should have covered all of the characters. I want to make sure I go through this and make sure, because if you haven't played the games, you should at least know these characters, because they're all going to be in it. They usually have relevance in the current one. Yeah, we know all of those characters. The old Class 7. Others. And the fact that they call him George Gnome isn't very, very helpful. I mean, George, no, it's clearly the Gnomes. I don't know why his last name had to be Gnome. I figured that out way too fast. The second his nameplate came up and I knew what the Gnomes were, I'm like, it's part of it. I think it was supposed to be obvious, though. Roselia. Yeah, I think they've covered everyone. But this game 4 will also cover other games like Trails in the Sky, Trails of Azure, you know, the Trails in the Sky trilogy, I should say, and Trails of Azure, Trails of Zero. It covers everything. So those characters, I think at least some of them will be in it for sure. So you might have to expect spoilers from there too. This is like the finale to this arc of Legend of Heroes, Trails. But I think the next arc is going to be like Calvard or something. But this is like the Erebonia arc. So, yeah, every character, every story, this is like the end to all of them, I think. I mean, I haven't beat the game, so I don't know. I've only played Act 1. So, Gilead, that's all the people. Suspicious figures. We've seen all of them. World introduction is not like the world trails. This stuff you might not understand, but it's kind of... The more you hear it, the more you get it. You know, like orbments, if you've never played trails, that's like... They put orbs in their devices, and then that lets them use magic, arts kind of stuff. Not magic, because magic's a different thing in this. But, yeah. And then the 5 major cities, these were all covered in the story. The countries, Calvard, Erebonia. Liberl is the Trails in the Sky trilogy. That's where it all takes place. It's down south. They didn't cover Remiferia, but I don't know much about it myself, honestly. Or Northumbria. Crossbell is mentioned quite often. And I'm sure we'll see plenty of that. And there are these little things like the War of the Lions, the Witches and Gnomes, and the Black Records that are kind of important. I mean, they definitely are important, but they're not things we really need to go over here. If anything, I'd suggest looking those up if you've never played. Because, well, like the Black Records, there's so many long texts. You're not going to show me all the Black Records, are you? Oh, it's just a single page. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, there were 2 pages. And the War of the Lions is the war that took place 1,000 years ago and created the Divine Knights, or the Great One, and then it was separated into the Divine Knights, that kind of thing. So, yeah. There's a lot still missing here, but they did a great job summing up all the games. I could actually, reading through it, I actually felt like I was able to relive the game a little bit, all 3 of them. But it's been a while since I played any of them, so it was a good refresher for me. I'm glad I read through it. Even if no one like actually watches this video, I'm glad I took the time to do it, because you know, you forget stuff after a while. So yeah, my camera will not be this big, by the way, in the actual game. Just is right now because I'm talking. But that's going to be it for this. I'll probably be uploading part 1 at the same time. Maybe a little bit delayed, but yeah, they should be right around the same time. Just I wanted to take this chance to, you know, give anyone a chance who has never seen Trails to understand the story. Because I get it. Not everyone has 300 hours. These games are tough, time-wise, big time, and it's gonna be interesting for me. As you can, well, you see, they didn't even explain. I mean, Reen's chained up there. Like they left some stuff out, but obviously Osborne had him. That's actually how the game ended, and I had to wait so long after 3. And I was just so upset when it cut to black, like Sopranos, and was just like, nope. Reen's captured. He's stuck in demon form, or whatever you want to call it. You can't turn it off. That's just how it starts, or ends. So, and they didn't even really like go into detail about a lot of things. You didn't get the impact from, you know, seeing the Millium die or any of that. What can you do? Oh my god, this is a very fast back to menu. Interesting. Well, either way, I will see you in episode 1. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you there.